Chapter 2664. As a female cultivator, Fairy Xianxia already had a knot in her heart regarding Xiaohua and Shui. She had never seen Shui, but she had heard Xiaohua mention her before. She had even secretly inquired about her before. However, Xiaohua had already made it clear to her. The intelligent Fairy Xianxia knew that Xiaohua had already made up his mind. She must not be jealous and make Xiaohua unhappy. This would be inappropriate for her, Xiaohua, and even Shui. Secondly, when Shui confessed, she was not by Xiaohua's side. She had not even confessed her love to Xiaohua. From this point of view, Shui's courage to love and hate was much stronger than hers. She could only let Shui take the initiative. Thirdly, Shui was also a disciple of Imperial Thunder Sect. Fairy Xianxia understood the principle of the pavilion closest to the water enjoys moonlight first. This was something she could not achieve. Besides, with Shui by Xiaohua's side, Fairy Xianxia could rest assured that no other female cultivator would interfere with her relationship with Xiaohua. Fourth, she had the fate of being together with Xiaohua first. Xiaohua had also said clearly that in Xiaohua's heart, she was much more important than Shui. From this point of view, Fairy Xianxia knew that Xiaohua, who had always valued friendship, would treat her well, even better than Shui. Based on the above thoughts, Fairy Xianxia could accept this Shui who had an opportunity that she could not have. She had also made up her mind to get along with her in the future. But for this sudden appearance of Mingyu, she definitely felt more pressure than a mountain. This was a golden core cultivator, and Fairy Xianxia also vaguely knew that Nameless was the first male cultivator that Mingyu, a golden core cultivator, was prepared to accept in her heart. If Mingyu really had the idea of dual cultivation with Nameless, Fairy Xianxia did not know how to kill this idea. What made Fairy Xianxia the most bitter was that Mingyu's Nameless was not real. This Nameless was her lover, Xiaohua. What made Fairy Xianxia feel the most incredulous was that Mingyu, a Jindan stage teacher, would mention her lover in front of her. Every time she talked about John Doe, the shyness and admiration in her eyes were purer than that of a 16-year-old girl. Furthermore, Fairy Xianxia could only follow Mingyu's thoughts and talk to her intimately. Of course, Fairy Xianxia would also attack Mingyu from time to time, talking about John Doe's appearance and his short stature. That damned enemy. I don't know where he ran off to. He shouldn't be here. Fairy Xianxia saw that the interior of the yin-yang sword array was filled with dazzling lights. The sword beams and magic treasures were locked in an intense battle. From time to time there would be loud explosions. However, she did not see any familiar figure. She could not help but grit her teeth fiercely. Her fine white teeth seemed to have bitten into Xiaohua's chest. Sure enough, right next to her, there was a round disc that looked like a moon. It was Mingyu's magic treasure, Mingyu. At the same time, Mingyu's melancholy voice sounded, "Alas, what a pity! I wonder where senior brother Nameless is. If he was here, he would probably be able to break this array, right? Don't you agree, Martial niece Xianxia?" Yes. If that old man was here, he would definitely be captured easily. Fairy Xianxia bit the word old man heavily, just like how she bit Xiaohua fiercely. Mingxiu, be careful. It was just that. Just as Fairy Xianxia was about to bite off a piece of Xiaohua's flesh, two extremely strange green and red sword beams streaked across the sky. Those who were hit by the sword beams all had their heads separated from their bodies. It was truly powerful. And these two sword beams were sweeping towards Mingxiu and the rest who were not too far away from Fairy Xianxia. Fairy Xianxia's warning was still a little too late. Mingxiu and 3 other Foundation establishment disciples who were on good terms with Fairy Xianxia had joined forces to deal with the other sword beams. Not to mention that they did not hear Fairy Xianxia's warning. Even if they did, they would not be able to dodge in time. Fairy Xianxia did not dare to be careless. Without releasing her Phoenix Dharma body, she activated the tidal bead within her Dharma body. A stream of connate primordial water flew out and turned into a water screen the size of a palm, blocking in front of Mingxiu and the rest. Swoosh, with a soft sound, the 2 sword beams sank into the connate primordial water. But what shocked Fairy Xianxia was that the 2 sword beams were not disintegrated by the connate primordial water. In fact, the 2 sword beams only changed their direction after entering the connate primordial water. Then, they suddenly pierced towards Fairy Xianxia. Get out of the way! Mingyu was right beside Fairy Xianxia. Seeing that the connate primordial water was unable to block the green and red sword beams, she hurriedly shouted. The bright moon that was flying above her head shot out diagonally. The bright moon was like a round disc, emitting a bright moonlight, blocking in front of Fairy Xianxia. Gotcha! With a crisp sound, the green and red sword beams hit the magic treasure, Mingyu. The bright moon flashed, and the two sword beams flashed. The light on the bright moon dissipated, and a small crack appeared on the magic treasure. Hiss! Mingyu saw that the magic treasure was damaged, and the two sword beams were gradually disappearing. She could not help but gasp. How? How can these two sword beams be so powerful? Martial Ant Mingyu. Fairy Xianxia did not have time to thank her. She hurriedly said, "From what I see, the sword beams in this yin-yang sword formation are not the same. These two sword beams are the same as the ones that killed the Changbai sect Golden Core seniors. And the green and red sword beams that we encountered earlier should be from the swordsmen who set up the formation. They are not the same as these two sword beams." Mingyu's eyes flashed, reflecting the green and red sword beams. She turned to look at the center of the sword formation, at the two green and red sword pillars. She said, "That's right. These two sword pillars are the eye of the sword formation. The green and red sword beams attracted the sword beams of the swordsmen who set up the formation. Maybe there are only two sword beams in the sword pillars, and the rest are illusions. As long as we destroy these two sword pillars, the yin-yang sword formation should be broken. Even if we can't break it, the rest of the green and red sword beams can be dealt with by the formations of the Foundation Establishment and Qi-refining disciples. It is 100 times stronger than the yin-yang sword light that only Jindan stage seniors can defend against, and the green and red sword light that ordinary swordsmen can defend against. It is even mixed with some illusions, making it impossible to distinguish between reality and illusion." Fairy Xianxia also came to a realization. "Let's go and report to Senior Xiangming." Mingyu looked up and saw Hang Li, Xiangming, and the other Golden Core cultivators of the conference hall working together, flying in front of the group of disciples. Hang Li and the rest were not the first to retreat, but they had the same idea as LV Ruocheng. First, they worked together at the edge of the yin-yang sword formation to create an opening, allowing the group of Dao sect disciples to escape from the sword formation. Hung Heng and the others activated their own Dharma treasures and flew in front of them. The storm-like green and red sword lights landed on their Dharma treasures but were unable to cause any ripples. They were all destroyed by the Dharma treasures. Occasionally, the true yin and yang sword lights would hit their Dharma treasures, but they only managed to break a little of the Dharma treasures' defense, which would be repaired by other Dharma treasures moments later. They were far from being able to cause any damage to them. Of course, as Hang Li and the rest flew to the edge of the sword formation, they were also paying attention to the situation within the sword formation. Seeing how bloody the yin-yang sword formation was, Hang Li whispered, "Fellow Taoists, we need to speed up. This yin-yang sword formation is too cruel. The green and red sword beams are split into yin and yang, and the sword chi seems to have some special effect. When the two sword beams combine into one, the power is far greater than two. It is especially useful for destroying the defensive light of our cultivators. Any disciple below mid-foundation establishment stage can't resist at all. At this moment, they can only rely on their combined attacks and formation techniques to fight back. Once they run out of magic power, they won't be able to use the sword formation. Not to mention borrowing the power of the sword formation, even if a swordsman rushed out and fought with us face to face, we disciples would not be a match for him." Yes, fellow Taoist Hang Ming is right. Li Jijie controlled his flying sword. After clashing with the sword beams of the yin-yang sword formation a few times, he also gained some insight. He replied, "With the sword formation, sword cultivators can defeat many and break this sword formation. Sword cultivators don't have anything to rely on. We can advance or retreat, and we can maintain our victory." This. Desun's tone was a bit hesitant. He whispered, "I have a bad feeling." Hung Li frowned and asked, "Could it be that fellow Taoist Desun is thinking the same thing as I? Is it the yin-yang sword beam that killed the Changbai sect disciples just now?" Desun didn't answer Hang Li directly. Instead he asked, "Fellow Taoist Hang Ming, are you saying that the sword beam that even Golden Core cultivators can't resist is placed at the edge of the sword formation to block our way out?" Hung Heng looked above his head and saw the sword lights flying out from the two sword pillars. Like a fountain, They connected with the green-red sword lights dozens of miles away and enveloped him and the others. He nodded and said, "That's right. This is what I'm worried about." Xiaojie and the others who set up the formation must have placed extremely powerful flying swords at the edge of the sword formation to prevent us from breaking the formation and returning. I's worry isn't limited to that. Desun sighed. We saw it just now. Other than the Yin Yang sword beam that killed the Changbai sect's golden core cultivators, we haven't seen many sword beams as powerful as this. Most of the flying swords in this sword formation can only kill cultivators below mid-foundation establishment stage. What about cultivators above early foundation establishment stage? Do they rely on those rare Yin-Yang sword beams? Hiss. Although the group of golden core cultivators failed in their plan, their thoughts were not bad. They immediately sucked in a breath of cold air and almost all understood. Hang Ming said anxiously, "Could it be that fellow Taoist Desun is saying that LV Ruochang has set up other sword formations besides this Yin-Yang sword formation? This sword formation can kill mid-foundation establishment stage, late foundation establishment stage, and even golden core cultivators?" That's right. LV Ruochang and the others have been setting up this sword formation for more than 8 years. If it wasn't for a sword formation that could kill golden core cultivators in the conference hall, would she need to rack her brains? She only needs to fight us in the state of Shi and the state of Lian. Desun felt that his premonition was right. Chapter 2665. Heng Zhao was even more hesitant and almost stopped. He asked hesitantly, "Are we not going to break the array?" "Master." Li Zongbao was not far from Hangzhou. When he saw Hangzhou hesitate, he hurriedly sent a voice transmission. "We can't hesitate now. Even if sword cultivators have many tricks up their sleeves, I have to deal with every move that comes my way. Let's break this array first." "That's right." Heng Zhao's heart skipped a beat. He cursed himself for being foolish and hurriedly added, "Even if the sword cultivators have such an arrangement, we have to break this Yin-Yang sword array first and let the disciples rush out." Good. The group of cultivators saw Heng Zhao's decision and knew that this was the only way, so they all sped up. "Zongbao." Heng Zhao's heart was still beating fast. He transmitted his voice in a low voice. "I'm not sure what to do now. If you have any ideas, you should have told me earlier. This battle is not only about the victory of our sect, but also the fate of our Utopia faction." "I understand." Li Zongbao hurriedly replied. Then he transmitted his voice again. "Also, I have an idea." "Say it." Heng Zhao hurriedly asked, "If you have any ideas in the future, tell me immediately." "Yes." Li Zongbao did not dare to delay and continued. "In breaking arrays, the strongest point has always been the flaw. Previously, LV Ruochang used this method to break my golden destruction array." "That's right." Heng Zhao was shocked again. He turned his head slightly and looked at the sword pillars that were already far away. He transmitted his voice. "Zongbao, you said that these 2 sword pillars are the most powerful part of the Yin-Yang sword array. Then, they should be the eye of this Yin-Yang sword array, right?" "Yes." Li Zongbao replied honestly. "What I think is that these sword pillars must be the eye of the array. I'm sure all the golden core stage masters know this too. However, Xiaojie and the others use these sword pillars to kill a golden core stage martial uncle at the beginning. This makes people feel that these 2 sword pillars are extremely powerful and not easy to break. Let's look at the edge in the distance." They even knew that we wanted to escape from the sword array, so they might have built the edge of the sword array to be extremely strong. On the other hand, the central sword pillar, the sword chi, is scattered around. It might be the weakest part of the sword array. "That makes sense." Heng nodded slightly. However, the Yin-Yang sword light was born from within the sword pillar and scattered from the center to the edges. These 2 sword pillars might not necessarily be the weakest points. They might even be the strongest points. At this moment, a magic treasure in the shape of a full moon was protecting a person. That person then summoned an azure primordial water to protect more than 10 people. They flew to the left of Heng Zhao and the others. The female cultivator who summoned the full moon magic treasure shouted, "Senior Marshal Brother Xiangming, I, Mingyu, have something urgent to report." When Heng Zhao and the others saw the dozen or so people from the Huanhua sect easily escape the attack of the green and red sword light, their eyes were filled with surprise. However, when their gazes landed on the true water, they immediately looked away, afraid that they would fall into the illusion of the true water. Xiang Ming frowned slightly and said loudly, "Mingyue, what's the matter?" At this moment, Mingyu kept her magic treasure, while Fairy Hongxia used the true water to shield the crowd. Ji Mingxiu and the other disciples of the Huanhua sect appeared in the true water. Mingyu bowed and said, "I'm Kai Hongxia, a Foundation Establishment disciple of the Huanhua sect. I'm here to report that something is wrong with the sword formation." "What's wrong? Quickly report it." Xiang Ming also had an impression of Fairy Hongxia. However, the situation was urgent. When he saw Fairy Hongxia using the true water to protect the Huanhua sect disciples, his expression softened and he urged. Fairy Hongxia did not dare to delay and hurriedly explained her thoughts. She then added, "I feel that although the yin-yang sword pillar is strong, it must have been created by the sword that set up the formation. However, it is still the eye of the formation and is the key to activating the sword chi of the swordsman. It is definitely not as strong as the surrounding sword chi. On the other hand, the surrounding sword chi must have been activated by Xianxia and the other illusory swordsmen to prevent us from breaking out. It must be extremely powerful. Instead of breaking the formation at the edge, why don't we just face the swordsman and directly destroy the sword pillar in the eye of the formation?" "Good." Without waiting for Xiang Ming to speak, Hang Ming clapped his hands and said, "The Huanhua sect disciple is right. Just now, I's disciple, Li Zongbao, reminded I to break the strongest sword pillar in the sword formation. He did not take the disciples who set up the formation into consideration. What this disciple said is exactly what Li Zongbao said." Hearing this, Xiang Ming's face showed some displeasure. It was obvious that Hang Ming was trying to steal his credit. However, the people around him looked thoughtful. Xiang Ming thought about it and knew that what Hang Ming said was probably true. Li Zongbao might really have the ability to break the formation. "Fellow Taoist Hang Ming, what you said is also the suggestion of my Huanhua sect disciple?" Xiang Ming asked. "That's right." Hang Ming nodded and looked at the crowd. He said, "I was just thinking about how to break this formation. Since the Huanhua sect disciple has made this suggestion, then we will split into two groups. One group will still be led by I to the edge of the sword formation, and the other group will be led by Xiang Ming to the center of the formation. My disciple, Zongbao, will assist the Golden Core Taoists to break the yin-yang sword pillar. The Huanhua sect disciples will follow me to the edge of the formation. As for who will go to the center of the formation, Xiang Ming will have to choose for himself." Hearing this, Xiang Ming looked at Hang Ming helplessly. Actually, everyone knew that although what Fairy Hongxia and Li Zongbao said was reasonable, the two sword pillars had to be broken at the center of the formation. They had just come out from there and now they had to turn back. If these two people's predictions were right, then so be it. If they were wrong, then they would be walking back into the tiger's den. Whoever Xiang Ming chose would most likely bring that person back to his death. Xiang Ming would not cause trouble for himself. He quickly said with a smile, "Hang Ming, you must be joking. You are the one in control of this battle. How can I speak? Although I have to turn back to break the formation because of my disciple's suggestion, I can only choose the person to follow me." Hearing this, Fairy Hongxia suddenly realized that her words had dragged Xiang Ming into a possible quagmire. She immediately bowed and said, "Uncle Xiang, since I have made such a suggestion, then I must take responsibility. I am willing to accompany you to the center of the sword formation." Very good." Xiang Ming nodded slightly. His expression was unreadable. Mingyu also sighed. She did not think too much about it. Seeing Fairy Hongxia's decisive choice, she did not say anything else. She flew to Fairy Hongxia's side and expressed her support for Xiang Ming. Ji Mingxiu and the other Huanhua sect disciples were all clever people. Knowing that there was no need to hesitate, they immediately moved to Fairy Hongxia's side. "All of you, follow Hang Ming to the edge of the formation." Seeing that his disciples had made such a decision, Xiang Ming was happy. He pointed at the disciples other than Mingyu and Fairy Hongxia. "Your cultivation is shallow. Even if you go back, you won't be able to help much. Your thoughts?" "I know." "Yes." Ji Mingxiu and the rest did not dare to refute. They flew to Hang Ming's side. Li Zongbao pondered for a moment. Looking at Fairy Hongxia and Mingyu, he also raised his immortal whip and flew to their left. "Ha ha ha! This old man will volunteer." De Sun laughed and waved his hand. A few Tai Ching sect disciples followed him and flew to Li Zongbao's left. He said, "Fellow Taoist Heng Ming, please don't blame me." "That's right. I will also head to the center of the formation." Ji Heng's mind was also racing. Without waiting for Heng Ming to point her out, she flew to Dasun's side. "Since you want to break the formation and find the weakness of the yin-yang sword formation, how can I be left out?" Xiong Huasong was also confident and flew out with a smile. Following which, a few people flew out without waiting for Heng Ming to point out their names. They were Xuanyin Sec's Gao Wei and the rest. Great! Heng Ming saw that the number of golden core cultivators who took the initiative to return was not more than half, but it was almost the same. He clapped his hands and laughed. "Everyone is noble and unsullied. I appreciate it. When we break the yin-yang sword formation, it will be time for us to reward you. Fellow Taoists, please." With that, Heng Ming flew out first, leading the rest of the cultivators to the edge of the yin-yang sword formation. Xiang Ming led Dasun and the rest to the center of the formation. After flying for a while, Li Zongbao heard Fairy Hongxia's voice transmission. "Senior brother Li, may I ask, where did Xiaohua go?" "Xiaohua's whereabouts? I don't know either." Li Zongbao knew what Fairy Hongxia was thinking. He frowned slightly and said, "But I know that he is not in this sword tomb, nor is he in this sword formation." Sigh. Fairy Hongxia sighed and did not ask any more questions. "Junior sister, Hongxia." Li Zongbao hesitated for a moment before he sent a voice transmission. If junior brother Xiao is here, even though his cultivation is outstanding, when it comes to truly fighting, he might not be able to accomplish anything. Moreover, this is a sword formation against a magic formation. The effect of a single cultivator is much smaller. It is better that he is not here. Fairy Hongxia clearly didn't understand the meaning behind Li Zongbao's junior sister Hongxia, nor did she understand the reason why Xiaohua wasn't here. She just casually responded. Li Zongbao also didn't know Fairy Hongxia's understanding of Xiaohua, so he didn't say anything more. The green and red sword pillars shot straight up into the sky, then connected with the green and red sword light dozens of miles away, forming the entire yin-yang sword formation. On the sword pillars, Xiao Jie of the Kuan sword sect, Yang Jioding of the Supreme Harmony sword sect, Meng Changshou of the Soaring Feather sect and Li Ying of the Herd of Macaws Valley looked coldly at the bloody massacre in the sword formation, with a hint of excitement in their eyes. Xiao Jie looked at the corpses of the Qi Refinement and Foundation Establishment initial stage disciples within a few miles of the sword pillars. He turned to Yang Jioding and said, "Fellow Taoist Yang, it is indeed as Senior Sister Lu said." The cultivators of the Dao sect were already terrified and fled in panic. No one noticed the two yin-yang sword pillars. Chapter 2667. Yes, Senior Sister Lu is the mastermind. Everything is going according to her plan. Yang Jioding also nodded. Although there were some deviations when we entered the sword tomb, the flaws do not obscure the beauty. The final outcome is still in her hands. Li Ying frowned slightly and said, "It's a pity that these Dao sect cultivators did not scatter and flee as LV Zhenyu expected. I'm afraid that our yin-yang sword formation will not be able to withstand a full-force attack from those Dao sect golden core cultivators." "Hee hee," Yang Jioding chuckled and said, "You don't have to worry about that, Li Zhenyu. Although the situation of the cultivators retreating is beyond Senior Sister Lu's expectations, she has already made arrangements for such a situation. The sword formation that Junior Sister Xiaojia and I have laid down will fight them to the death in the end. All of the sword qi of the yin-yang sword formation will be gathered in one place when it is time to fight. The Dao sect cultivators that have been killed by the yin-yang sword formation will not be able to withstand a single blow from the yin-yang sword formation." "I hope so." Li Ying did not seem to think that the situation was as optimistic as Yang Jioding's. He only nodded slightly. Just as he nodded, his yellow eyes flashed slightly as he noticed the abnormality of the yin-yang sword formation. He hurriedly pointed his finger and said, "Not good. The Dao sect cultivators have discovered the secret of the yin-yang sword formation. More than 10 golden core cultivators are leading their disciples over." "Oh, it's true." The smile on Yang Jioding's face froze. With the help of the sword formation, he could see clearly and cried out involuntarily. Meng Changshou said leisurely, There are indeed many hidden dragons and crouching tigers among the Dao sect cultivators. They still managed to discover it in such a short time. So what? Yang Jioding refused to admit defeat. The Yin Yang sword pillar is activated by the Yin Yang sword. Even golden core cultivators will find it difficult to resist. Even if they discover it and come here, they can only temporarily affect the sword formation. When we kill them, senior brother Ya, Xiaojie reminded him. Let's make preparations. Every moment counts. The Yin-Yang sword formation has already killed tens of thousands of Qi refinement and foundation establishment cultivators. We have already completed senior sister Lu's task. Yes. When Yang Jioding heard this, his heart skipped a beat. He immediately activated the sword essence in his body, as his body emitted a scarlet sword beam. A flying sword that resembled a blazing sun flew out from his body. However, as soon as the flying sword fell into the scarlet sword pillar, all of its sword intent disappeared, and it returned to being a flying sword that floated within the scarlet sword light. It was unknown whether it was Yang Jioding's sword intent or the Yin-Yang sword light that forced Yang Jioding's sword intent to revert back to a flying sword. Xiangming led the numerous golden core cultivators past the group of cultivators fighting against the sword formation and returned to the left side of the dragon-slaying slope. In the time it took for Xiangming and the rest to return, over 10,000 Dao sect disciples were killed by the green and red sword light. Seeing that there was no one around the left side of the dragon-slaying slope, Xiangming understood what Fairy Hongxia meant. The slight anger he had towards Mingyu and Fairy Hongxia had already dissipated. Mingyue. Xiangming pondered for a moment before instructing, "You and Kai Hongxia will lead a few foundation establishment disciples to the sword pillar and find out what's going on." Yes. Just as Mingyu agreed, two green and red sword lights emitted a rumbling sound. Bas! Yang Jioding and Xiaojie's figures appeared near the sword pillar. Xiaojie's smile was like a flower as she said, "So it's fellow Taoist Xiangming from the Washing Flower sect. Welcome back." Humph. Since when did a sword cultivator become a fellow Taoist of my Dao sect? Xiangming sneered, but Xiaojie continued to smile. Look at what fellow Taoist Xiangming is saying. I thought that fellow Taoist missed me and specially came back to visit me. Bah! Xiangming spat out a mouthful of saliva and sneered. Although I am not talented, how can I look down on an outsider? If you surrender to my Dao sect, this old man can still consider it. Xiaojie was not someone who would compromise. She was only pretending to stall for time. How could she know that Xiangming's words were so unpleasant to hear? Naturally, she knew that she could not reply and could not say another word. Thus, she kept her mouth shut. Hee. Fellow Taoist Xiaojie. Xiangming's interest was piqued as he laughed. This old man does not mind your looks. If you have the heart. Shut up. Xiaojie sneered. The azure sword light around her flickered rapidly. She made a sword sign and the small sword floating in front of her suddenly jumped out of the azure sword light like a fish and stabbed towards Xiangming. At the same time, a red brilliance also separated from the scarlet sword pillar where Yang Jioding was and flew out of the sword pillar at almost the same time as Xiaoming's small sword. The two small swords were like two birds who were willing to fly together. The moment they flew out of the sword pillar, they immediately snuggled together like two young men and women who were intimately attached to each other and flew towards Xiangming together. Humph! Xiangming sneered. He stretched out his hand and a spiritual talisman appeared in his hand. He said anxiously, "Fellow Taoists, the situation is urgent. We must not give the sword cultivator any chance to breathe." The spiritual talisman in Xiangming's hand suddenly expanded. With the activation of Xiangming's spiritual power, a palm of several feet in size flashed in the air. It was Xiangming's protective spiritual talisman, the Hand of the Nascent Soul. The Hand of the Nascent Soul had already appeared, and the surrounding area was shrouded by the power of the Hand of the Nascent Soul. Although the azure and red flying swords were unusually agile, under this extremely heavy imprisonment, they still could not move an inch, as if they had fallen into a quagmire. Seeing this situation, Xiangming was overjoyed and said with a smile, "This old man does not mind your looks as a sword cultivator. If you have the heart." Unfortunately, before Xiangming finished speaking, the azure sword light around Xiaojie's body shone brightly. At the same time, a sword light separated from the sword pillar behind her and rushed towards the azure small sword. Almost at the same time as Xiaojie, Yang Jioding also pointed his finger. A sword light of several feet in size separated from the sword pillar and rushed towards the small scarlet sword. Hum! A loud sword cry rang out as the two swords suddenly expanded and shot towards the huge nascent soul hand to entangle it. Quick! Xiangming was slightly shocked, but he did not stop making hand seals. The huge hand slightly clenched and grabbed the two enlarged flying swords. Pa! There was a crisp sound like bamboo being broken. Yang Jioding and Xiao Jie's faces turned pale. Humph! A cold snort came from above everyone's head. Meng Changshuo's body shone with azure and red brilliance. As the brilliance shone, an exquisite lantern appeared in the air. Hum! The exquisite lantern was right in between the crimson red and azure sword light. As the exquisite lantern emitted its brilliance, the sword light of the two sword pillars actually stopped, breaking off from the green and red sword light that was dozens of feet away, and converging on the exquisite lantern. Swoosh, like a peacock spreading its tail, the azure and red sword lights were like 7 rotating colors. They were extremely fast and powerful as they pierced towards the Dao sect cultivators. Not good. Not only was Xiangming shocked, but Ji Hong and the rest were also shocked. The sword lights piercing towards them were obviously very powerful. They were comparable to the full-strength attack of an illusory swordsman. If they did not use their full strength to counter it, they would definitely be hit by the azure and red sword lights. Rumble! There was a series of sounds. In the face of Ji Hong's defense, Li Zongbao's immortal piercing whip and Fairy Xiaxia's Xiantian primordial water, the azure and red sword lights did not weaken at all. Instead, they gained the upper hand. The azure and red sword lights even passed through Xiangming's nascent soul hand and merged with Yang Jioding and Xiao Jie's sword lights. They almost broke Xiangming's nascent soul hand. However, the green-red sword light was only able to break through the defenses of the other cultivators. It was unable to harm them. Seeing that Xiangming's talisman was effective, De Sun raised his eyebrows. He turned to look at the others and shouted, "Fellow cultivators, success or failure depends on this." Yes. Xiong Huasong, Ji Hong and the rest responded in unison. With a wave of their hands, numerous spirit talismans appeared in their hands. The dermic powers in their bodies were activated slightly. Immediately, brilliance of various colors emerged from the spirit talismans. Several powerful suction forces were also emitted at the same time. Waves of heaven and earth spiritual energy uncontrollably formed into hurricanes and frantically poured into the spirit talismans. One by one, large swaying hands slowly appeared in mid-air. Although the Yuanying hands had yet to be activated, the space within 100 feet of them had already solidified. An incomparably powerful aura suppressed Li Zongbao, Fairy Xianxia and the rest. Under this aura, the sword pillar that was like a heavenly jade pillar let out a loud roar. It sounded like a sorrowful cry, but also like a cry of struggle. At the same time, the red sword light and blue sword light inside the sword pillar trembled rapidly. Waves of sword energy shot out from the sword light and rushed around the nascent soul's hand as if it was trying to resist the restriction. Yang Jioding and Xiao Jie were as calm as water. It was as if they already knew that this would happen. However, their eyes were filled with a strong desire to fight. Yang Jioding raised his head slightly and looked at Xiao Jie, who was in front of the azure sword lights. Xiao Jie met Yang Jioding's gaze and nodded slightly. As if they had a tacit understanding, the sword lights around the two of them became even more resplendent. The sword lights even covered the two of them. Then, a powerful suction force was released from their bodies. Woo-woo, two soft sounds were heard. The two small swords that were caught by Xiangming's nascent soul hand suddenly let out a sword cry. They struggled with all their might and fell into the suction force. Ayo! Xiangming was slightly stunned. The powerful suction force from the sword pillar had actually sucked the two flying swords away. That was not all. Just as the two flying swords rushed out of the nascent soul hand and approached the sword pillar, Yang Jioding and Xiao Jie's transformed flying swords also slowly rushed out of the sword pillar. The huge flying swords, one green and one red, had a sword light trailing behind them. This sword light was also connected to the sword pillar. In the blink of an eye, the two flying swords entered the giant sword pillar. The two flying swords let out a loud roar and a powerful suction force came from the giant swords, shattering the suction force from the nascent soul hand. At the same time, there was an absolute sharpness within the suction force. As the two flying swords vibrated and flew, an unstoppable force formed at the tips of the two flying swords. This sharp force accelerated as the flying sword shot towards Xiang Ming's nascent soul hand. Chapter 2668. Humph. You're courting death, Xiang Ming sneered. His whole body flashed with the same brilliance. The Dharma power in the Jindan rushed into the hand of the Yuanying. The hand of the Yuanying shook again and even flashed with layers of shadows. The big hand grabbed the 2 second-grade illusory swords. Rumble. A series of deafening explosions rang out incessantly. The light was dazzling, and the sound was ear-piercing. Li Zongbao and Fairy Xianxia sighed. Even De Sun, Xianghua Song, and the others felt a sharp pain in their divine senses. It was as if they had been injured by the green and red sword radiance. Not good. Xiang Ming suddenly exclaimed. With a loud boom, a foot-long gap was blasted open on the thumb of the nascent soul's hand by Yang Jioding and Xiujia's flying swords. As soon as the gap appeared, it immediately expanded uncontrollably. The entire nascent soul's hand showed signs of collapsing. How could Xiang Ming dare to be negligent? He tried his best to activate his true yuan. The nascent soul's hand flashed with brilliance, trying to repair the gap. Woo! The 2 flying swords swayed slightly, as if they were preparing to attack. Then they rushed towards Xiang Ming again. How dare you! At this time, De Sun's nascent soul's hand had already formed. He snorted coldly and also grabbed at the 2 flying swords. Unexpectedly, just as De Sun's nascent soul's hand reached out, the 2 flying swords suddenly turned around and rushed towards Ji Hong, who was the furthest away from Xiang Ming. Oh no! Ji Hong's nascent soul's hand had already been severely injured in the fight with LV Ruochang. At this time, it had just been summoned. The speed of absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was not as fast as De Sun and Xiang Ming's, so it had not formed at all. Seeing the 2 flying swords turn towards her, she immediately had a bad feeling. While Ji Hong tried to activate her nascent soul's hand to block the flying swords, she also hurriedly patted her forehead, preparing to summon her magical weapon. Boom! At this time, the 2 flying swords suddenly sped up, far faster than before. Before Ji Hong could summon her magical weapon, the 2 flying swords had already pierced her nascent soul's hand. The 2 green and red sword radiances twisted together, and the nascent soul's hand was like a broken lantern, splashing brilliance in all directions. It was cut in half by the 2 sword radiances. That was not all. The sword light did not stop as the nascent soul's hand rumbled and swept towards Ji Hong's body. Ji Hong was almost scared out of her wits. She was only at the early stage of Jindan realm and could barely activate the hand of Yuanying. Previously, when she was fighting with LV Ruochang, her Jindan had already been damaged. Now, she was facing the Yin and Yang sword light of 2 second-grade illusory swordsmen. Within the sword light, the Yin and Yang shackled the spiritual power in her body, and the sharper sword qi cut her vitality into pieces. Instantly, Ji Hong's mind went blank. Even the magic treasure that she had yet to use remained in her body. Fellow Taoist Ji, Zhou Qingping from the Thousand Leaf Ridge shouted anxiously from not far away. Perhaps, this is what Taoist Chen Mo is thinking. Ji Hong knew why she had to follow Xiang Ming to the center of the Yin-Yang sword formation. It was because her desire to kill LV Ruochang was too strong that she encouraged Ting Zhao to mobilize hundreds of thousands of Dao sect disciples to chase after the sword cultivator. If not for this old woman's stubbornness right now, our Dao sect would definitely be celebrating. Ji Hong's return this time was originally because she had some thoughts. If she could not break this Yin-Yang sword formation, how could she face the elders of the Clear Leaf sect? However, she never expected that before she could even use 1 or 2 of her methods, the sword cultivator's Yin-Yang sword light would choose her first. And she did not even have the slightest strength to fight back. Forget it. Ji Hong's thoughts changed. She gritted her teeth and wanted to self-destruct to injure Yang Jioding and Xiujia. Unfortunately, she was still too optimistic. Just as she had this thought, the green and red sword light crossed in front of her and pierced through her body. Not even a drop of blood appeared. When the sword light flew away, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth swept past. With a pung sound, blood splattered everywhere. Ji Hong was actually split into 2 by the Yin-Yang sword light. Bitch! Where do you think you're going? Thousand Leaf Ridge's Zhou Qingping had a good relationship with Ji Hong. Just now, he reminded Ji Hong. At this time, he shouted and urged his nascent soul hand to chase after the 2 flying swords. I will help you too. Chen Fan Valley's Su Zhiqi shouted and also chased after the two flying swords with a faint blue shadow hand. Seeing Ji Hong die, Xiangming was naturally shocked. At the same time, he also urged his nascent soul hand to block the two flying swords. It was as if the two flying swords had no way to escape under the imprisonment of these nascent soul hands. However, it was at this moment that the two flying swords suddenly shattered, transforming into two streaks of light that were even faster than lightning. Furthermore, the place where they were fleeing was not high up in the sky where the nascent soul cultivators had surrounded them. Instead, they rushed into the ground of dragon-slaying slope. What kind of sword cultivation secret technique is this? Xiong Huasong and the others were slightly surprised. Xiong Huasong and Dasun's nascent soul hands had already formed. These two big hands did not block the two flying swords. Instead, they grabbed at the green and red sword pillars from the left and right. The sword chi on the sword pillars tried its best to resist, but the power of the nascent soul hands was too strong. The sword pillars began to shake gradually in the hands of the nascent soul. When Xiangming and the others saw Yang Jioding and Xianxia escape into the ground, they immediately split into two groups. Xiangming's big hands grabbed at the green sword pillars, while Zhou Qingping and Su Zhiqi's big hands slapped the ground. However, before the two of them slapped the dragon-slaying slope with their nascent soul hands, they heard a loud moo-moo sound coming from the ground of dragon-slaying slope. It was as if tens of thousands of bulls were crying out in unison. Boom! Just as this loud sound was produced, the two sword pillars began to tremble rapidly again. However, this time, they did not expand, but gradually contracted. In the blink of an eye, two huge swords condensed into the shape of swords and rushed out from the green and red sword pillars. Come! Xiangming shouted. His big hands suddenly grabbed the sword pillars that had shrunk to the size of a bowl. Wah! A loud sword cry came out from the sword pillars. Just as Xiangming and Xiong Huasong grabbed the red sword pillars, Yang Jioding's sword light rushed out from the hands of the two nascent souls. Naturally, Xiaojia's sword light also rushed out from the hands of Dasun's nascent soul. This doesn't seem to be just the strength of a second-grade illusory swordsman. The three of them were a little shocked. However, before they could recover from their shock, they noticed the abnormality in the sky. They saw that the exquisite lamp that Meng Chongshou had transformed into had expanded several times under the green and red brilliance. The flying swords that Yang Jioding and Xiaojia had transformed into actually rushed out from the sword pillars and flew towards the exquisite lamp. Moreover, the two sword pillars also followed the two sword lights towards the exquisite lamp. Boo! With a loud sound, as if an oil lamp had been lit, the two sword pillars rushed into the exquisite lamp. The entire exquisite lamp emitted a dazzling green and red brilliance. It illuminated the area within a radius of several li. Not good. Seeing such a change, Dasun and the others were surprised and happy. They were happy because the two sword pillars that rushed into the exquisite lamp had lost contact with the green and red sword light in the sky. They had cut off the connection between the yin-yang sword formation's eye and the surroundings. Heng Zhao and the others could easily use their nascent soul hands to break through the formation's edge. But they were shocked because Yang Jioding, Xiaojia and Meng Chongshou had done this. They definitely had a powerful backup plan. They would definitely have to use all their strength to deal with it. Perhaps, just as the thought appeared in their minds, the exquisite lamp that Meng Chongshou had transformed into began to spin again. Dozens of green and red brilliance flew out from the exquisite lamp at the same time, piercing towards Dasun and the others. Tisk tisk, the sword lights swept past, and the sound of them breaking through the air was extremely ear-piercing. Caw! A phoenix cry rang out. Fairy Hongxia did not dare to hesitate any longer. Her ice phoenix spell body flew out of her body, and the Xiantian primordial water poured out layer after layer, surrounding the space around her. There were dozens of layers of Xiantian primordial water, if not hundreds of layers. Fairy Hongxia had discovered that the Xiantian primordial water's defense against the yin-yang sword light was limited, which was why she had racked her brains to come up with a countermeasure. Ming Yu, Li Zongbao and the other Golden Core and Foundation Establishment cultivators who were close to Fairy Hongxia did not hesitate as they quickly dodged under the Xiantian primordial water. Boom! The three sword lights hit the Xiantian primordial water. The sword lights shook rapidly within the primordial water, and the dozens of layers of Xiantian primordial water were about to break through. Caw! The ice phoenix spell body let out a mournful cry. Another sword light hit the left wing of the spell body, and a corner of the left wing was sliced off. Fairy Xianxia also let out a loud cry as her body trembled rapidly. She could no longer control her spell body, and it shrank back into her body. Ming Yu and Li Zongbao did not dare to delay as they quickly flew to the left side of Fairy Xianxia and took out their magic treasures to protect her. At the same time, the Xiantian primordial water that had blocked the 3 sword lights was naturally kept back into the Ice Phoenix spell body. However, after being protected by so many layers of Xiantian primordial water, the sword lights were much slower, and their power was also much weaker. There was no need for Fairy Xianxia to defend herself. Ming Yu, Li Zongbao and the rest who were protecting her worked together to destroy the 3 sword lights. However, the sword lights were much more powerful than before. The cracks on Ming Yu's magic treasure were even larger, and Li Zongbao's immortal piercing whip was almost sent flying by the sword lights. With Fairy Xia's Xiantian primordial water, Ming Yu, Li Zongbao and the rest were lucky. They knew that the yin-yang sword lights that had penetrated dozens of layers of Xiantian primordial water were still so powerful. What about those cultivators who did not have Xiantian primordial water protecting them? At the same time that the sword lights hit Fairy Xia's Ice Phoenix spell body, the other yin-yang sword lights attacked Dasun, Xiangming and the rest under the control of the exquisite lamp. Almost at the same time, the yin-yang sword lights hit the talisman in the Yuanying's hand. Like a paper doll being cut by a pair of scissors, an extremely obvious crack appeared on the talisman. Dasun and the rest were already prepared. The magic power in their bodies surged rapidly, and the light on their hands flashed violently. They clenched their fists tightly, trying their best to control the sharpness of the sword lights. Boom! After holding on for only a moment, Zhou Qingping and Su Zheqi's hands collapsed, and the light was extinguished. After a loud boom, the green-red sword lights, like before, casually intersected with the two's bodies. As their protective golden light was extinguished, the two did not even have the chance to scream. They were dead. Chapter 2669. 2 golden core cultivators with protective talismans could not escape from the yin-yang sword radiance, much less those without talismans who could not hide under the connate primordial water. Under the 2 sword radiances, the 2 golden core cultivators were sliced in half, their corpses falling from the sky. Fortunately, the exquisite lamp could not control much of the yin-yang sword radiance. The remaining golden core and foundation establishment cultivators who were not attacked by the yin-yang sword radiance fled in all directions. Just as everyone was escaping, the yin-yang sword radiance in Xiangming, Dasun and Xiong Huasong's hands let out a wail and gradually collapsed. Let's do it together. Seeing this, Dasun didn't care about the 3 sword cultivators who were gradually revealing themselves as the light of the exquisite lamp faded. He shouted loudly and the 3 of them grabbed the 2 sword pillars with their talismans at the same time. It was as if 3 huge hands were really grabbing the 2 long flying swords. The green and red sword pillars, which were only as thick as a bowl, shook left and right in the hands of the 3 huge hands and actually showed signs of collapsing. The exquisite lamp's radiance was cold and lonely. Meng Changshuo's figure appeared. His face was pale and his body was trembling slightly. It was completely out of his control. On his left and right, Xiao Jie and Yang Jioding's faces were emitting a dark red radiance and the other a dark green radiance. They did not look normal. The situation doesn't look good. Li Ying did not make a move. He flew to the left of Meng Changshuo to protect him and said softly, "I'm afraid my yin-yang sword formation can't." Just as Li Ying finished speaking, a faint loud sound came from afar. The 4 of them looked up and saw that the green and red sword radiance had disappeared. Hang Zhao and company must have defeated the enemy at the edge of the yin-yang sword formation. Forget it. Yang Jioding sighed and said, "The talismans of the Dao sect cultivators are too powerful. They are comparable to a nascent soul cultivator's attack. We already expected this before we set up the formation. The 3 of you have already contributed a lot to the sword domain." Li Ying nodded and said, "This formation has killed tens of thousands of cultivators. We should be proud. Let's go." Meng Changshuo looked at the sword pillar that had been shaken by Dasun and the others and said, "The yin-yang sword has been controlled by a nascent soul. It won't be long before the eye of the yin-yang sword array is broken." "How can it be that easy?" Xiao Jie sneered. He opened his mouth and his intrinsic sword rushed out. "Sword friend Xiao Jie." Yang Jioding was shocked. "If you lose this sword, I'm afraid your cultivation will fall to the first grade of the illusory sword realm. So what if I'm a first-grade illusory sword? Xianxia said coldly, even if I fall into the drawing sword realm, I'm still willing. All right. Yang Jioding clapped his hands and opened his mouth. A small crimson sword flew out and followed Xiaojia's azure sword into the green and red sword pillar. What was different from before was that Xiaojia's small azure sword had fallen into the scarlet sword pillar, while Yang Jioding's small scarlet sword had fallen into the azure sword pillar. Rumble. The moment the two small swords entered the sword pillar, there was an explosion. Xiaojia and Yang Jioding's bodies went limp and they almost collapsed in mid-air. Meng Changshou and Li Ying did not dare to delay. They reached out to support the two of them and ignored the crowd of cultivators as they rushed into the sky. The sword pillar exploded from where the two small swords entered and began to collapse. Even the nascent soul hands of Dasun and the others were unable to stop or restrain it. As the sword pillar fell, the green and red sword beams around the yin-yang sword array also began to collapse and fell along with the sword pillar. Oh no, dodge! Seeing this, Xiangming immediately shouted. He extended his nascent soul hands and covered an area of 100 feet. Dasun, Xiong Huasong and the rest also understood. Several nascent soul hands flew out and covered an area of 100 feet, protecting Fairy Hongxia and the rest. Even the fleeing Golden Core and Foundation Establishment cultivators hurriedly flew back. In the blink of an eye, the sword pillar completely collapsed and fell into the Dragon Punishing Slope. Following this, the entire Dragon Punishing Slope shook violently, even more than when the sword beams appeared. Seeing tens of thousands of cyan and red sword lights flying out of the ground, those cyan and red flying swords flying out of the yin-yang sword formation also flew out and slapped towards the entire yin-yang sword formation within a radius of tens of miles like a tidal wave. Ah! Ah! Screams of agony rang out incessantly, almost like a purge. Cultivators below the middle stage of Foundation Establishment were unable to withstand the final wave of yin-yang sword chi alone. Another several thousand cultivators fell. After the miserable shriek sounded, the terrifying green-red sword light that was dozens of miles away had completely disappeared. I'm afraid the yin-yang sword array has been broken by our combined efforts? Xiangming, Dasun and the rest retracted their nascent soul hands. Under their protection, the dozens of cultivators following them did not suffer any losses. Even if it's broken, we've also suffered heavy losses. Xiong Huasong's face was gloomy. He knew in his heart that the low-level cultivators who could survive in the yin-yang sword array were few and far between. The sword cultivator had set up this yin-yang sword array with the intention of killing all the cultivators. Quickly, meet up with fellow Taoist Hangming and the rest. Xiangming instructed a few disciples to collect the corpses of Ji Hong and the rest. With a wave of his hand, he led the group towards the edge of the yin-yang sword array. Although it was only a short few miles, the tragic scene along the way was really unbearable to look at. Not only was the smell of blood in their mouths and noses, but the blood stains on the ground and the dismembered limbs made one feel as if this was not the human world. In the many years of the Great Tao battle, none of the great arrays were as tragic as this one. Fairy Hongxia's Dharma body was injured by the yin-yang sword beams, and her own body was also injured. Her body flew slightly slower and was almost at the back. Seeing this scene, she could not help but sigh. Our Tao sect cultivators have suffered too many casualties, but that hateful sword cultivator did not even leave behind a corpse. Ming Yu and Li Zongbao did not fly too far away and stood guard beside her. Ming Yu did not understand Li Zongbao's eagerness. Previously, she had not seen Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia's relationship. However, when she thought of Li Zongbao's reputation in the Three Kingdoms of Cultivation and Fairy Hongxia's beauty, she naturally understood. She smiled and replied, "The sword cultivators are all hiding behind the sword array. Even if they were killed by us, their corpses would not be exposed in the sword array. Furthermore, the sword array does not only depend on one's strength, it also depends on one's luck. Everything else aside, if not for Martial Niece Hongxia's Xiantian primordial water, Martial Niece Zongbao and I would have died too." Fairy Hongxia's expression darkened as she said softly, "I naturally understand what Martial Aunt Mingyu is saying. Although I am a little disgusted by this battle, seeing the corpses everywhere, I can't help but hate the sword cultivators. I can't wait to kill them all. I can't wait to see the corpses of sword cultivators everywhere. Only then can I quench the hatred in my heart." Li Zongbao's expression was still indifferent as he looked straight ahead. He did not participate in the conversation between the two. Mingyu looked at Li Zongbao and said softly, "Martial niece Zongbao, you are famous in this battle and have killed countless sword cultivators. Do you have such thoughts?" "All right, martial aunt understands." Li Zongbao replied indifferently. "Under the great Tao, all are ants. In the great battle, all are vengeful spirits. If I don't kill the sword cultivators, the sword cultivators will kill me. There's no other way." "Thank you, Senior Li." Fairy Xianxia understood Li Zongbao's words and said softly. Mingyu felt that this was a good opportunity and wanted Li Zongbao to talk more with Fairy Xianxia. However, Fairy Xianxia did not say anything else after a "thank you." Li Zongbao's expression was even colder. Mingyu could not help but sigh. However, before she could think about it, Mingyu frowned and said, "The sword array is filled with the corpses of our Dao sect cultivators. Why don't the surviving disciples collect the corpses?" Now that the sword array has been destroyed, even if there were hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators, they would not dare to face hundreds of thousands of cultivators directly, right? Martial Aunt Mingyu. Li Zongbao glanced at the expression on Mingyu's face and explained, "According to my master, this array has more than one layer. If we collect the corpses now, there will be enough space for the sword cultivators to set up the array. We might as well do it in one go." "What? There's still a sword array?" Mingyu did not think as far as Hang Hang and the rest. She could not help but cry out. Li Zongbao laughed bitterly in his heart, but there was no change in his expression as he replied, "Everything is just a guess. Now, it's time to uncover the mystery." Mingyu looked ahead doubtfully. They had returned from the dragon-slaying slope. Although their flying speed was not slow, it could not be compared to the disciples who had been advancing towards the west side of the sword array. After the Yin-Yang sword array was destroyed, they had rushed out of the Yin-Yang sword array like a tidal wave and had long disappeared. The Yin-Yang sword array is already so powerful. Sword cultivators. What other tricks do they have? Fairy Hongxia's face showed a trace of fear. If it was anyone else, even if it was Mingyu, Li Zongbao might not answer this question. But Fairy Hongxia was Kai Wuxia's sister and Xiao Hua's lover. Li Zongbao had to answer. Black Sky Sect's martial uncle Xianghua Song was able to set up the 10-direction annihilation array. The magic within is far beyond my imagination. I believe that sword cultivator LV Ruochang might not lose to martial uncle Xiong. For a moment, everyone was silent. LV Ruochang had led tens of thousands of swordsmen to destroy the golden annihilation array. This had long changed everyone's impression of sword cultivators as barbaric. The Yin-Yang sword array just now would no longer be looked down upon. Just at this moment, rumble, the rumbling sound rose again. It was still coming from all directions, and it was pushing towards the direction of dragon-slaying slope. As expected, no one spoke, but this sentence rang in everyone's heart at the same time. Furthermore, everyone's face changed color. "Let's go quickly." Mingyu placed her hand on Fairy Hongxia's shoulder and said, "Don't use your powers. I'll bring you along." "Thank you, martial uncle." Fairy Hongxia expressed her gratitude. The three of them increased their speed and flew towards the west side. "Run." The three of them flew for a moment and met a large group of cultivators who were fleeing in panic. Everyone was panicking and had long lost their formation when they were fleeing. There were even a few cultivators who were shouting loudly. Chapter 2670. Shut up! Li Zongbao raised the immortal piercing whip in his hand and shouted, "We are all Dao sect cultivators. Even if we fall into the sword array of a sword cultivator, we must remain calm. How can you make such a big fuss?" Senior brother Li. Hearing Li Zongbao's shout, everyone turned around. Seeing that it was Li Zongbao who had killed Qin Jian, they were all overjoyed. "All of you, don't panic. Just focus on defending the formation. Even if there is a sword array, there will be a golden core stage elder to break it." Li Zongbao said calmly, "The Yin-Yang sword array was already so powerful and all of you managed to escape unscathed. Even if there is a sword array, what can it do to us? Now that all of you are in such a mess, even if the elders break the array, all of you will not be able to escape." That's right. Senior brother Li is right. Some of the Foundation establishment stage elders heard and shouted, urging the scattered cultivators to get back into formation. In fact, everyone understood the logic behind Li Zongbao's words. These late Foundation establishment old men could also say it, but unfortunately, not many people would listen. Now that Li Zongbao was standing there like a white jade pillar supporting the heavens, his words were even more effective than the words of 100 late Foundation establishment old men. That steady aura slowly spread out, and the tremors in the distance were no longer as frightening as before. All of you advance in an orderly manner. If you encounter a sword cultivator's attack, you can use the array to attack. Do not try to be a hero and face the sword chi alone. Li Zongbao reminded again, I will follow the Golden Core stage elders to the edge of the array and see if we can find any loopholes. Thank you, Senior Brother Li, for breaking the array. All the cultivators, regardless of which sect they were from, shouted. All of you protect yourselves well. Li Zongbao nodded slightly and gave Mingyu a look. The two of them increased their speed again. Mingyu saw that Li Zongbao was commanding the troops well and calmly, and was able to stabilize the morale of the troops better than a golden core cultivator like herself. She could not help but feel happy for Fairy Xianxia. However, in Mingyu's eyes, Fairy Xianxia's performance was not as she had imagined. As Mingyu and the others flew, they encountered more and more disciples. Most of these disciples stopped respectfully in mid-air. However, there were still some disciples who glanced at the three of them without any expression on their faces. It was as if in this critical moment, they could only rely on themselves. What golden core? What masters? They were all useless. Mingyu and the rest did not mind. In the face of danger, everyone's life were their own lives. Even if a nascent soul cultivator could not protect a low-level disciple, why should they be so respectful? Xiangming and the others were indeed flying very fast. At this moment, they had already reached the edge of the Yin-Yang sword formation. There were tens of thousands of cultivators directly facing the edge of the Yin-Yang sword formation. Their attacks covered an area of several hundred meters, and the intensity of their attacks was also extremely dense. Unfortunately, the Yin-Yang sword array was formed by hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators and Yin-Yang swords. LV Ruocheng had already considered the methods that the Dao sect cultivators would use to break the array. The array formed by tens of thousands of cultivators was very simple. How could it break the sword array? Before Hung Ting arrived and Xiangming and the others destroyed the array core, the attacks of the tens of thousands of cultivators were like scratching an itch. They were completely useless. There were even a few times when the green and red swords rampaged about without restraint. Many mid- and late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators were unable to dodge in time and were slain by the swords. Although some of the late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators had been killed, the group of cultivators facing the swordlight had no way of retreating. They could only brace themselves and step over the corpses of their fellow sect members to fight. As a result, the number of high-level Foundation establishment disciples who died here was actually much higher than the number inside the formation. Sigh. Xiangming sighed and glanced at Dasun and Xianghua Song. Both of them looked terrible as well. Dasun waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Hang Ming and the others are already far away. Let's hurry over. If nothing happens. Dasun had only just spoken when another rumbling sound came from a few kilometers away. This sound was like the beating of a drum, but it was also like a tsunami. Shortly after, the ground shook once more, and an indescribable clamor arose in everyone's hearts. Xianghua Song narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance. He said coldly, Elvirucheng. She is indeed my enemy. Besides the Yin-Yang sword array, there are other sword arrays. Let's go. I'd like to see how many disciples this sword cultivator has to be able to set up such a huge array. Dasun raised his eyebrows and said in high spirits. His previous depression had long disappeared. Xiangming also came to a realization. He turned to look at the golden core cultivators around him and the tens of thousands of Foundation establishment disciples flying around him. He laughed and said, That's right. 10 times the amount. LV Ruocheng actually set up 2 layers of sword arrays. How many disciples can she have? This second array. I'm afraid it's a bit of a bluff. Sure enough, when everyone listened carefully, although the vibrations and sounds seemed to be coming from all directions, if one were to carefully observe, they would be able to tell that most of the sounds were coming from the west. The sounds from the east, north, and south were much smaller. In fact, The sounds were spreading in 3 directions. Ha ha ha, little brat from the Dao sect, I've been waiting for you here for a long time. A thunderous voice came from the sky in the distance. At the same time, a figure like an iron tower loomed in the sky. It was unknown if this person's cultivation was high or if it was the effect of the sword array, but the impression that this person gave off was extremely tall and mighty. Humph, ignorant sword cultivator. Not far from that person, a cold voice sounded. Then, a golden light flew out from the source of the voice. A slender rope about 10 feet long flew into the sky and rushed towards that person like a dragon. This is fellow Taoist Lu Xinwu's spirit-binding chains. Xiangming was very familiar with Lu Xinwu from the Xianxia sect. Once he saw the golden light from the magic treasure, he hurriedly said. While everyone was moving, they looked at the sky anxiously to see how that swordsman would deal with it. But they saw that the spirit-binding chains seemed to have a mind of their own. They flew against the wind and in the blink of an eye, flew in front of that tall swordsman. Ayaya, that swordsman cried out in surprise. His blurry figure was revealed. It was a burly man whose body was pitch black from head to toe like charcoal. Following the swordsman's cry of surprise, his body actually staggered, as if he had stepped on something slippery. He was unable to dodge in time and the spirit-binding chains immediately wrapped around his body. Ha ha ha, seeing this, a few young disciples in the initial stage of foundation establishment could not help but laugh. One of them even said, "Such a clumsy swordsman." However, before this disciple could finish his sentence, he saw that the swordsman's body flashed with an intense black sword light. The sword light also destroyed the spirit-binding chains in an instant. At the same time, the black sword light flashed and spun rapidly around the swordsman's body. Not good. Seeing this, Lu Xinwu knew that he had fallen into the swordsman's trap. At the same time, he knew that things were not going well and hurriedly formed a spell to retract the spirit-binding chains. However, the swordsman's body seemed to have an indescribable suction force. No matter how Lu Xinwu channeled his magic power, the spirit-binding chains could not break free from the black sword light's binding. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The black sword light around the swordsman's body suddenly expanded, like the black quills of a hedgehog. Lu Xinwu immediately lost his connection with the spirit-binding chains. Pa pa pa, a series of crisp sounds rang out. Although the sound was not loud, it was very clear in the sky. A few rays of golden light flew out from the black sword light. The golden light flickered slightly and gradually disappeared. Looking at Lu Xinwu again, his face showed a trace of redness. His eyes were filled with regret as he looked at the spirit-binding chains that had been cut into several pieces. Ha ha ha, the Dao sect's methods are only a LV Jianghu. You're overthinking. The pitch-black swordsman raised his head and laughed. If it were up to me, why would we need to set up a formation in this sword catacomb? We could just directly kill our way into the 3 kingdoms of cultivation. Second brother. At this moment, a voice rang out not far from the dark-skinned man. Then, a green sword light flashed, and an extremely thin swordsman, who was like a bamboo pole, appeared. He was dressed in a green sword robe. LV Jianghu's great wisdom is not something you can measure. You've only defeated a mid-golden core cultivator. How can you be so arrogant? Don't embarrass the 3-sword sect. Yes, I know my mistake. Although the pitch-black man lowered his head in fear, it was obvious that he did not care. He even arrogantly winked at the group of golden core cultivators. Hiss, Hung Zhao and the rest were frightened by the green and red sword light. When they saw the swordsman's green sword robe, they could not help but gasp. I am Qing Jian of the 3-sword sect. The tall and thin swordsman lowered his head slightly and looked at Hang Zhao and the rest. His face was expressionless, like a block of wood. I am Bai Tianming of the 3-sword sect. The pitch-black man shouted loudly. His voice was much louder than Qing Jian's. I am Bai Shan of the 3-sword sect. Another voice rang out. It sounded soft, like a female swordsman. But when everyone looked to the left of Qing Jian, where the yellow and red sword light flashed, what appeared was a white and fat male swordsman with a bulging belly. However, this white fatty had a bulging forehead, thin eyebrows, small eyes, and white skin. He really did look like a female cultivator. Congratulations to my fellow Taoists of the Dao sect for breaking out of the Yin-Yang sword formation. Welcome to the 5 elemental swords formation. Qing Jian said calmly. His tone was filled with mockery. I have been waiting for you all for a long time, but I did not expect you to only break the Yin-Yang sword formation now. The Yin-Yang sword formation was set up by the Kuan sword sect and the Taiha sword sect together. You all actually spent so much time. Yes, you even lost so many disciples. This is really beyond my expectations. Chapter 2671. It's just a bullshit Yin-Yang sword formation. It's as easy as blowing off dust for us. Hearing Qing Jian's ridicule, Hung Tang couldn't help but get angry. Your 5-element sword formation is just a copy of my Dao Sect's 5-element sword formation. What's there to be proud of? Is that so? Bai Tianming laughed and waved his hand. A pitch-black sword light flew out as he shouted, Come, come, come. I'll fight you one-on-one. Second brother. Without waiting for Hung Tang to reply, Qing Jian berated, The Dao Sect's brats don't know any better. Why are you following suit? The one who set up the formation, fellow Sword Xiao, hasn't even reported his name. How can you start fighting? Hearing this, Hung Tang's nose almost became crooked from anger. Haha, that's right. We haven't even met with the Dao Sect's cultivators. How can this formation be activated? About 300 meters away from Qing Jian and the others, there was another flash of white sword light. A sword cultivator wearing a white sword robe appeared, and beside him was a female swordsman wearing an aqua-blue sword robe. I'm Xiao Jinding of the Sword Cauldron Sword Sect. Greetings to everyone from the Dao Sect. There were some flaws in the sword formation just now, so I went to check it out. Please forgive me for not welcoming you. As he spoke, the swordsman named Xiao Jinding actually cupped his hands and bowed politely. I'm Luo Shuilan of the Flowing Water Sword Manor. Although the female swordsman was smiling like a flower, with blue sword light flashing around her body, she didn't speak much. She only spoke one sentence before stopping. Cut the crap. Lu Xinwu said coldly, Let me see what kind of trash your 5-element sword formation is. This is Lu Xinwu of the Splendid Flower Sect. Xiao Jinding's face revealed a trace of astonishment. Your Splendid Flower Sect is one of the top sects in the country of Xi. Why are you so lacking in etiquette? Who said that the 5-element sword formation was set up by only 5 sword sects? We waited patiently here and didn't try to kill you. You call yourself the Orthodox Taoist, but you don't have the patience to wait for the masters of the sword formation to appear? You. Lu Xinwu's nose was even more crooked than Hang Tang's. Fellow Taoist Lu. Don't be anxious, don't be confused, calm your heart. Yuan Zhongyu of the Kunlun sect hurriedly shouted, This is the swordsman's trick to confuse us. He wants us to fall into his trap. We'll just wait for them to put on a show. That's right. Lu Xinwu's heart skipped a beat. He nodded at Yuan Zhongyu and said, Thank you for your reminder. I am a little impatient. Tell the disciples. Hung Li sent a voice transmission in a low voice. Set up an attack formation and charge to the west at any time. This old man is Qishan Meng Fan. In mid-air, there was an inexplicable fluctuation. Suddenly, a short and fat old man appeared. This old man looked very old. His hair and beard were snow white, and the top of his head was shiny. There was only a circle of hair around his head, which looked similar to a circle of beard. Looking at the old man's face again, he was very plain, no different from an ordinary farmer in the secular world. However, it was very similar to his name, Ordinary. This old man is Liao Ke of the 7 Spiritual Mountains. A high-pitched chirp of a bird resounded in the sky. A 5-colored light flew over from afar and entered everyone's field of vision in the blink of an eye. However, the light stopped about 1,000 feet away from everyone. Each of them was tall and skinny. Their eyes were slender and long. Their eyebrows were slanted to their temples. Their thin lips were slightly trembling under their tall noses. Their voices shook the surroundings. This swordsman looks a little similar to Xiao Hua. Li Zongbao and the rest flew closer and could see clearly. Li Zongbao could not help but feel surprised. He could not help but look at Fairy Hongxia. Even Fairy Hongxia was slightly stunned. However, she immediately frowned. Although this person was not Xiao Hua, there were some similarities between his eyebrows, especially that pair of phoenix eyes. However, this Liao Ke's eyes were full of arrogance. They were far from Xiaohua's calm and amiable eyes. It could only be said that they were similar, and could not be said to be similar. Good heaven! Seeing the appearance of the 7 swordsmen, Hang Feng and the rest could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. The previous yin-yang sword formation only had 4 second-grade illusory swordsmen. Now, there were actually 7 of them in the 5-element sword formation. This meant that the 5-element sword formation was even more powerful than the yin-yang sword formation. The yin-yang sword formation had killed more than half of the Dao Sex Foundation Establishment middle stage cultivators, and more than half of the Qi refinement stage cultivators. What about the 5-element sword formation? Xianxia saw, Liao Ke said coldly. I heard that you are an expert in black sky sex formations. The 10 directions annihilation formation that LV Jianghu was trapped in was your work. To tell you the truth, this 5-element sword formation is really much more powerful than the yin-yang sword formation. The heavens are virtuous, and I do not wish for too many cultivators to be buried here. If you know what's good for you, all of you should surrender. When my sword domain sword transformation senior and your Dao Sex nascent soul masters arrive, all of you will be able to return safely to the 3 cultivation countries. Although your reputation will be damaged, it is still 100 times better than dying here, right? Liao Ke's words were even more powerful than the yin-yang sword formation. In an instant, he had broken the bottom line of many low-level foundation establishment and Qi refinement stage cultivators. That's right, we will fight to the end. Although we will die, but who will remember us? Rather than that, why not surrender and return to our homeland after the war? Although our reputation is a little bad, we can still look forward to the great Tao. It is still better than cutting off our cultivation path. All right. Many cultivators were muttering like this. Ha ha ha, Hang Feng flew a few feet forward and laughed loudly. You sword cultivators do not cultivate and do not know the power of the heavenly Tao. You are just making a fool of yourselves here. Not to mention that Tao cultivators are natural enemies. Will the cultivators who surrender be able to wait until the end of the war? Even if the cultivators who surrender are able to return to their sex alive, their Tao heart will be damaged and they will have inner demons on their cultivation path. How can they improve when the Tao is 1 foot tall and the devil is 10 feet tall? How can they improve? Rather than having inner demons in their hearts and not being able to cultivate the great Tao, why not be magnanimous and walk the path of killing sword cultivators to the end? If they die and their names go down in history. If they live, they can wash away their worries and their cultivation will improve by leaps and bounds. Are there no records of this in the records of the various sects? After the war, who knows how many cultivators have their realms and cultivations improved greatly? How can we Dao sect cultivators be short-sighted people like you, who do not wait for the heavenly Tao? When Hang Feng said this, many cultivators felt a chill in their hearts. It was as if they had been enlightened, and many cultivators' foreheads were even covered in sweat. Liao Ke's words were not wrong, but he was a sword cultivator after all. How would he know about the Dao sex cultivation? Hang Feng's words were even more correct. Unless the cultivator did not want to cultivate anymore and only wanted to escape with his life, then he should surrender. Otherwise, the inner demons would exist in his cultivation for the rest of his life. If he did not have a great opportunity, it would be extremely difficult to get rid of them. And such a great opportunity would probably be even more difficult than surviving the war of Dao cultivators. However, those who were enlightened naturally had the ability to comprehend. Those who did not could only sneer in their hearts and take Hang Feng's words as a form of encouragement. Haha, what heavenly Tao! What great Tao! Bai Shun laughed loudly. He actually formed an orchid shape with his fingers and pointed at Hang Feng. Now that there is no life, there is only the Tao of life and death. There was actually a kind of charm in the plump, fair man's eyes. It was even more beautiful than Luo Xuelan's. Let's go! Hang Feng could not be bothered to say anything else. He waved his hand and secretly transmitted his voice. Instantly, the group of late Foundation Establishment stage disciples around Hung Heng, as well as a dozen early Oris core stage cultivators, all moved and flew towards the west. Hung Feng and the rest had already broken through the boundary of the yin-yang sword formation. However, they did not see the disciples outside the formation. Naturally, they knew that they had already died at the hands of Dao cultivators. They had long been anxious to leave this place. Now that they had received Hang Feng's orders, they all activated their dermic powers and wanted to rush out of the 5-element sword formation that had yet to be activated. Ha ha ha, I heard that Tao cultivators are all knowledgeable people. Previously, they did not wait for their masters to arrive before speaking. Now they want to leave without even waiting for their masters to speak. Really? I don't know what to say. Xiao Jinding covered his mouth and laughed. He looked very refined and was not worried about the cultivators escaping far. They are in a hurry to die. Qing Jian said coldly. Big brother, we. Bai Tianming was about to say something when suddenly, Hung Feng, Yuan Zhongyu, and the rest moved at the same time. They clapped their hands together and the talismans that they had flaunted earlier appeared once again. Several brilliant rays of light flashed and countless powerful hurricanes were born. Combine! Qing Jian shouted when he saw this. Green sword light flashed around his body and a sprout-like sprout was born from his sword light. As the sword light flashed, the sprout-like sprout grew rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a towering tree. Moreover, the tree did not stop growing. It grew bigger and taller again. Wang! A sword hum could be heard coming from the tree. The entire tree had turned into an incomparably huge sword. When Qing Jian turned into a sword, the other 4 Dao cultivators did not stop. Bai Tianming let out a roar. A pitch-black sword light rushed out and surrounded his iron tower-like body. Gradually, his body transformed into an iron tower. Moreover, this iron tower was in a quadrangular shape. The scattered sword qi condensed into strands of dust that resembled smoke. Bai shunned softly and bashfully, like a mortal girl undressing. She covered her face with her hands and the yellow-green sword light on her hands continued to shoot out, completely covering her. With a loud bang, the sword light turned into sparks. A pillar-like huge sword surrounded by flames appeared in the air. A look of disdain appeared in Xiao Jinding's eyes. It was as if he despised Hang Ming and the others for not declaring war. However, he did not hesitate. He crossed his hands and a silver-white brilliance appeared in his hands. As he rubbed it on his arm, the silver-white brilliance overflowed and enveloped his entire body. Chapter 2672. Bang! The sound of a golden drum rang out, and Xiao Jinding's body gradually disappeared. A long sword that resembled a spear appeared in the air. The only woman among the 7 swordsmen was Luo Shuilan. Her movements were the smallest. She waved her hand, and a blue sword light rose up like a ladle and sprinkled on top of her head. Hua! The sound of water gushing out was like a fountain. Countless sword lights rushed out from the source of the sound, and flew straight up to a height of several feet. Along with the flickering of these sword lights, Luo Shuilan's figure also disappeared. The sword lights were like sparkling water droplets, shining with an extremely beautiful blue light. It was several times more beautiful than Luo Shuilan's. The moment the 5 giant swords appeared, they also absorbed the 5 elements spiritual qi from 100 zhang radius like a whale swallowing water. The sharpness of the sword qi and the restrictive power of the sword lights were not much inferior to the Yuanying hands of Hung Hang and the rest. Kill Liao Ke and Ordinary first. Xianxia Song immediately reminded everyone when he saw that the 5 of them had all transformed into swords. Ha ha ha! Liao Ke sneered as a 5-colored brilliance flashed around his body. In an instant, Liao Ke's body slowly elongated amidst the brilliance and 5-colored feathers appeared on his head. Furthermore, a pair of wings that were several feet in size slowly extended from Liao Ke's ribs as the brilliance flashed. A multicolored peacock slowly revealed its figure. Wu! Liao Ke flapped his wings slightly. As the 5-colored light and the feathers on his wings trembled, the 5-element spiritual qi within 100 zhang radius became chaotic. The Yuanying hands that were absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth stopped at the same time, and the light trembled. Not good. Hang Hang and the rest seemed to have a bad premonition. They seemed to know what this splitting-edge 5-element sword formation was. Attack! Yuan Zhongyu and the rest activated their spirit talismans, sending the power from their golden dawn into them. At the same time, they tried their best to take out their magical treasures, wanting to kill Liao Ke before the 5 giant swords could take action. They wanted to prevent the formation from activating. Everyone rushed towards Liao Ke, leaving Ordinary to the side. However, Ordinary was extremely ordinary. There was no light around him, nor was there any fluctuation. Not even a trace of sword light could be seen. Furthermore, the heaven and earth spiritual energy that was like a hurricane also disappeared when it hit Ordinary's body. All of a sudden, Ordinary disappeared. He had disappeared into the hurricane. His disappearance did not attract the attention of any cultivators. However, a few moments later, Ordinary reappeared 1,000 feet away from the group of cultivators. However, the current Ordinary was different from before. Ordinary's originally short stature became even shorter. His entire body slowly elongated. Under the rising sun, Ordinary actually transformed into a flat disc that was a few feet in size. This disc was a little strange. It looked like it was made of metal but not metal. It looked like wood but not wood. There was no light on it. It was early in the morning, and there were some pitter-patter of raindrops. However, when these raindrops fell on the disc, they did not stop. Instead, they penetrated it as if there was nothing there. Only when the warm sunlight shone on it did it emit some light. This light was not sword light, but more like fluorescent light. This fluorescent light spots looked like starlight. These starlight spots rotated mysteriously, and their color gradually deepened. Wah! The 5 giant swords seemed to let out a sword hum at the same time. They flew into the air and flew towards Liao Ke. Quick, stop them! Xiang Ming shouted without hesitation. The 5 flying swords flew extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they were in front of Liao Ke's 5-colored peacock. However, to Xiang Ming and Xiong Huasong's surprise, the 5 flying swords swept past Liao Ke's 5-colored peacock without stopping at all. "Ayo, we've been tricked." When Hang Zhao and the rest looked in the direction of the flying swords, they saw the disc that was a few feet in size in the air, slowly rotating under the sunlight. The 5 flying swords rushed to the bottom of the disc, and 5 sword chi rushed out. The flying swords directly covered the disc. Wang! The disc let out a huge rumbling sound, and as if it had eaten a large amount of spirit grass, it rapidly expanded. Whoosh! When the disc became a few dozen feet in size, the 5 flying swords rushed up and pierced the 5 edges of the disc. Pang! Just as the 5 flying swords came into contact with the disc, countless tiny sword flashes shot out from the disc. It was as if countless meteors were flying in all directions, trapping all the cultivators within the meteors. Ah! 5 planets disc? Xiong Huasong was the first to realize that something was amiss. He shouted in shock. This? How did it end up in Han country? 5 planets disc? Is it the core of the legendary 5 planets reversal star array? When Hang Zhao and the rest heard this, they were also shocked. The so-called 5 planets reversal array was a legendary ancient killing array. It had long been lost on the Dawn Rain continent. The cultivators of the Dao sect had only grown up listening to stories of how this array had killed powerful cultivators. How could they not be shocked when they heard that the Dharma artifact that had fused with Ordinary's body was the core of this array? If I'm not wrong, it should be this. Xiong Huasong naturally knew more about array formations than Hang Zhao and the rest. He had some impression of something that had long been annihilated, but he didn't dare to be sure. This guy is the key to this 5-element splitting blade array. At this point, even if Xiang Ming didn't say it, who wouldn't know? The few golden core cultivators immediately abandoned Liao Ke and used their half-formed nascent soul hands to attack the 5 planets disc. Wang 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 wang. The humming of the swords grew louder and louder. The entire 5 elements disc began to rotate violently, and the 5 huge flying swords also began to rotate. As the 5 elements planetary disc rotated, more and more meteors shot out from it, almost covering the entire 5 elements planetary disc. The meteor emitted an extremely dazzling sword light, and the whistling sword energy pierced through the air. It simply charged aimlessly towards the entire 5-element sword formation. Hung Zhao and the rest's nascent soul hands approached Ordinary with great difficulty. The closer they got, the more sword light shot out. Furthermore, the astrolabe and the 5 flying swords had almost merged into one, forming a colorless ball of light. The powerful sealing force of the several nascent soul stage cultivators did not seem to have any effect on the ball of light. In fact, the omnipresent sword chi was constantly neutralizing the nascent soul stage cultivators' hands and preventing them from getting closer. Hung Zhao and the rest's expressions changed slightly. This was the hand of a nascent soul. The reason why they dared to face a 3rd-grade illusory swordsman was because they knew that the hand of a nascent soul could destroy an illusory sword and was their guarantee of survival. But now, There were only 6th-grade illusory swordsmen, and they were actually able to resist the hands of several nascent soul cultivators. How were they going to fight back? At this moment, a shocking bird cry rang out. Liao Ke, who had been ignored by everyone, suddenly flapped his wings again, and the 5-colored light shot into the sky. Woo! Below everyone, the ground that had suddenly stopped trembled again, and cracks appeared like when the Yin-Yang sword array was activated. Oh no! Hundreds of thousands of cultivators were lucky survivors of the Yin-Yang sword array. How could they not know how powerful it was? They hurriedly stabilized their bodies and activated the simple array, preparing to receive the attack of the sword array. Unexpectedly, from the cracks on the ground, the 5-colored sword light shot out. These sword lights did not attack the cultivators, but instead, they shot straight into the sky. Even the sword lights below the cultivators did not directly attack them. This is... Before the crowd of cultivators could react, the tens of thousands of sword lights collided with the meteors shot out by the 5-colored ball of light high up in the sky. Crackle, the sound of frying beans filled the entire sword array, and it did not stop. An unbelievable scene appeared in front of the hundreds of thousands of cultivators. All the sword lights exploded with the sound, turning into countless fragments of light. The fragments of light floated in the air, sparkling and translucent. Moreover, each of the light spots had a different color. There were red, silver, black, blue, and even green. They complemented each other beautifully, making for an incomparably dazzling sight. Seeing how beautiful the 5-element sword array was, all the cultivators were puzzled. Oh no, it's the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Just as everyone was stunned for a moment, someone immediately sensed that something was wrong. Although the scene was so beautiful, the sparkling fragments of light were absorbing different types of heaven and earth spirit chi. Wherever the fragments of light covered, the heaven and earth spirit chi would be completely absorbed by the fragments of light, leaving not even a trace behind. Even near the nascent soul's hand, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was nowhere to be seen. Although the nascent soul's hand was powerful, it was few in number. How could it compare to the omnipresent fluorescent light? Not good. Xianxia Song and the rest finally understood the power of the 5-element sword array. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth within the array was absorbed by the sword lights. Even if there were hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the Tao sect, where could they absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? How could they fight against sword cultivators? After understanding the mystery behind this, Hung Ju and the others' backs were drenched in sweat. They were all shocked by LV Ruochang's calculations. Of course, the Yin-Yang sword array could kill Qi refinement stage cultivators, and the 5-element sword array could kill foundation establishment stage cultivators. Then, what would happen after the 5-element sword array? It would probably be a sword array that could kill golden core cultivators? Quick, kill this bastard! Hung Feng and Dasun shouted. The golden cores in their dantians were surging, and they did not dare to hold back their true essence. They did not care whether or not they could absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the sword array. They poured their dermic powers into the nascent soul's hand. Woo! The nascent soul's hand indeed let out a roar and flashed with brilliance. Several waves of restrictive power increased once again and enveloped the 5-element sword array. How can it be so simple? Liao Ke's voice rang out. It was very arrogant. As Liao Ke flew, the 5-element sword array flashed with brilliance. As it flapped with all its might, an extremely large amount of fluorescent light surged into the nascent soul's hand. Pa! The first sound came from somewhere, but it was no longer important. Following that, the sound of explosions rang out everywhere. Even the immortal piercing whip was only able to knock down several flying swords. There were still several flying swords of different colors that rushed towards Li Zongbao's body. Li Zongbao was greatly alarmed. He was now a cultivator in the late stage of foundation establishment. If even he couldn't dodge these flying swords, how could others dodge them? Li Zongbao hastily swung his sleeve. Similar to Xiao Hua's Heaven and Earth sleeve, it was the Utmost Happiness faction's cuff restriction. In an instant, it covered the several flying swords. Naturally, Li Zongbao's cuff restriction was far inferior to Xiao Hua's Heaven and Earth sleeve. However, the Utmost Happiness faction's magic art was also unique. Puff! Puff! Li Zongbao's Taoist robe was pierced by several flying swords, but the flying swords had already dimmed a lot. Li Zongbao merely waved the immortal piercing whip and immediately knocked down the flying swords. Li Zongbao could clearly see that even though the sword light was shot down, the sword light had turned into even more sparks and scattered in the air like the starlight from before. It could turn back into a sword at any time to assassinate a cultivator. Splitting Edge 5 Elemental Sword Formation. It really lives up to its name. At this moment, Li Zongbao was really convinced. This sword formation was definitely not inferior to the Golden Destruction Formation. While Li Zongbao was struggling to deal with it, high up in the sky, the nascent soul hands that Hang Zhao and the others had sent out were also in trouble. The nascent soul hands were extremely powerful, but they also required a lot of heaven and earth spiritual qi. The 5 elemental sword fragments absorbed all the heaven and earth spiritual qi nearby, making it difficult for the nascent soul hands to form. Furthermore, under Liao Kei's control, an extremely large number of sword light fragments exploded around the nascent soul's hands. The hundreds and thousands of flying swords stabbed towards them like maggots. Although the nascent soul's hands had the power to restrain, under the impact of the flying swords, they gradually loosened. Even the talismans in the nascent soul's hands were attacked by the flying swords. Heng Zhao and the other golden core cultivators had a protective golden light around their bodies. When the flying swords hit them, they only flashed with golden light and could not really hurt their bodies. However, such an endless attack also consumed their dermic powers. Therefore, the golden core cultivators who were supporting the nascent soul hands could not free themselves to cast any spells to attack the 5 elements planetary disk. Of course, other than Heng Zhao and the other golden core cultivators who had spiritual talismans, there were many other golden core cultivators. These cultivators also took out their own dermic treasures and wanted to attack the 5 elements planetary disk. However, the flying swords were shooting out from the 5 elements planetary disk. The golden core cultivators could not get close to the 5 elements planetary disk and were immediately attacked by hundreds of flying swords. While the cultivators were protecting themselves, how could they really get close to the 5 elements planetary disk? What should we do now? Heng Zhao was a little anxious. He clearly knew that as long as they formed their nascent soul hands and restrained the 5 elements planetary disk, the 5 element swords that were everywhere in the sword formation would disappear. However, the nascent soul hands could not do anything. It was not just spiritual talismans. Without the 5 element spiritual qi, all the dermic spells and dermic treasures of the Dao sect were useless. It was not that Heng Zhao had not considered the possibility of the sword formation blocking the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. However, sword cultivators also needed spiritual qi of heaven and earth. If sword cultivators did not use spiritual qi of heaven and earth, their flying swords were just decorations. However, Heng Zhao had never imagined that sword cultivators would use such a method of encroachment, using countless tiny flying swords to snatch spiritual qi of heaven and earth from other cultivators. This method, even if Heng Zhao racked his brains, he would not be able to think of it. It's this thing. Just as Heng Zhao was at a loss of what to do, a ray of blue light in the distance attracted his attention. His eyes lit up and he had an idea. Heng Zhao was looking in the direction of Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao's cultivation was indeed impressive. Although he could not use the spiritual qi of heaven and earth outside his body, he could not completely defend against the flying swords with just the true essence in his body and the immortal piercing whip. Finally, he was hit by a few flying swords. Fortunately, Li Zongbao had a protective dermic treasure, so the flying swords were easily blocked. However, he knew that this protective dermic treasure was his last line of defense. Without true essence replenishment, his bottom line would be lowered every time the flying swords hit him. Therefore, he waved the immortal piercing whip with all his might to block the flying swords. And the flying swords were like locusts, inexhaustible. In fact, the flying swords that he shattered could still transform into flying swords. Such an endless cycle would cause even a nascent soul cultivator to eventually run out of true essence, right? Just as he was in a predicament, a ray of blue light flashed by. Just as he looked up, he immediately felt his heart tremble. Li Zongbao knew that this was Fairy Xia's connate primordial water. When he retracted his gaze, the thin layer of primordial water wrapped around him. At this moment, other than Fairy Xia, Mingyu, Ji Mingxiu, and the rest were all within the primordial water. Many thanks, Li Zongbao said calmly. He had wanted to protect Fairy Xianxia on account of Xiaohua and Wuxia. Who would have thought that he would be protected by Fairy Xianxia again and again? Connate primordial water. Li Zongbao immediately thought of the method Xiaohua used to kill Qin Jian. He thought to himself, this item must have been given to Fairy Xianxia by Xiaohua. Fairy Xiaoxia's Xiantian primordial water was indeed effective. Although it was only a thin layer, all the tiny swords that dashed over could no longer maintain the shape of flying swords when they were not covered by the primordial water. Once again, they turned into tiny specks of light and disappeared into the primordial water. Connate item. Impressive indeed. Li Zongbao sighed. Suddenly, his heart lit up. He hurriedly shouted, Junior Sister Xianxia, open up a small gap in the primordial water. Although Fairy Xianxia did not understand why, she still did it anyway. Master and disciple were truly of one heart. When Li Zongbao looked up at the invincible five-colored ball of light in the sky, Hang Heng's gaze also fell on it. Although Hang Heng did not say anything, his gaze met with Li Zongbao's. Li Zongbao understood his master's thoughts. He turned around and said, Junior Sister Xianxia, in this five-element splitting-edge sword formation, everything will be attacked by the five-element swords. Connate items are an exception. Connate primordial water, Connate primordial fire, Connate primordial wood, Connate primordial gold and Connate primordial earth can all counter this sword formation. Among the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, there are many who have such encounters. However, looking around us, we have yet to see such a person. Only Junior Sister has this Connate primordial water. Therefore, to break this formation and save the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect disciples, it all depends on Junior Sister. This. Fairy Xianxia was slightly taken aback. She did not expect that the heavy responsibility of saving hundreds of thousands of Dao sect disciples would fall on her shoulders. Of course, Fairy Xianxia was also an outstanding person. She knew that this was a great opportunity. After thinking for a while, she nodded and said, I will follow Senior Brother Li's instructions. Good. Follow me. Li Zongbao was overjoyed. Chapter 2674. Senior Brother Li. Ji Mingxiu said anxiously, the swordsmen who set up the array are all grade 2 illusory swords. Now that they have transformed into flying swords, how can Foundation establishment disciples like us withstand their attacks? Why don't Senior Sister Xianxia hand over the Connate primordial water to the Golden Core Masters? Li Zongbao nodded and looked at Fairy Xianxia. That works too, as long as Junior Sister Xianxia is willing to part with it for the time being. Fairy Xianxia smiled bitterly. If the Connate primordial water was in the mist-tide pearl, it would be fine no matter what. However, she had already sent the mist-tide pearl into her ice phoenix body. Even if she wanted to take it out, she could not. It's not that I'm unwilling. It's just that I can't take it out. I can only control it myself. Fairy Xianxia shook her head. All right, Xianxia, you can go now. I'll be responsible for the safety of Mingxiu and the rest for now. Mingyu took out her magic treasure Mingyu and said softly, Thank you, Martial Aunt Mingyu. Fairy Xianxia looked into the distance and said, There's a crimson-red glow over there and an azure-blue glow over there. It must be the Xiantian primordial fire and primordial water. If Martial Uncle has the time, you can head over and search for it. Thank you, Martial Aunt Mingyu. I'll immediately report to Master and send more Golden Core Masters to look for disciples who have Connate primordial water to refine magic treasures. Li Zongbao said hurriedly. Let's go. Seeing Fairy Xianxia release a corner of the Connate primordial water, Mingyu waved her hand and led the group away. After Mingyu and the rest flew away, Fairy Xianxia activated the Connate primordial water to protect herself and Li Zongbao as she flew into the sky. How could the Golden Core Masters not know what Fairy Xianxia's Connate primordial water meant? They were all overjoyed. Xiangming even shouted, Martial Niece Xianxia, you are the main contributor to breaking this array. Not only will my Rinsing Flower sect record your merit, even the dozens of sects in the Three Kingdoms will have to be grateful to you. Only Xionghuasong frowned and shouted, Fellow Taoists, please hold off these annoying flying swords. I'll discuss this with my martial niece. Thank you for your trouble, fellow Taoist Xiong. Hung Zhao knew that he and the others were inferior to Xianxia Song in terms of array formations, so he naturally activated his golden core again. His dermic powers surged out and supported the nascent soul hand once again. Even Liao Ke, who was flapping his wings to activate the 5-elemental firefly fragment, had a slight change in expression. Although the splitting-edge 5-elemental sword array had ordinary as the array core, with the azure sword and the other 5-elemental flying swords as support to activate the array, Liao Ke was also an extremely important figure. He was a mutated peacock bird cultivator and was adept at conjuring the 5-elemental spirit Qi. Ordinary and company with the array core and had no time to fend for themselves, so Liao Ke was responsible for defending and protecting the array core. Although there were dozens of golden core cultivators among the Dao sect cultivators earlier, these golden core cultivators had been caught off guard and were unable to mobilize the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Hence, they had been suppressed and attacked by the 5-element broken fireflies. On the other hand, Liao Ke had relied on his unique peacock talent to control a large number of broken fireflies and was not at a disadvantage against dozens of golden core cultivators. This had caused his originally arrogant heart to become even more arrogant. At this moment, when Liao Ke saw Fairy Xia's connate primordial water approaching, his heart skipped a beat. With a flap of his wings, thousands of broken fireflies rushed towards Fairy Xia. There were so many of these broken fireflies and they were so powerful that a beginner golden core cultivator who was standing between the two barely managed to hold on for a moment. Not daring to stay any longer, he hurriedly dodged and sent the wave-like broken fireflies towards the connate primordial water. Pa, pa, pa. Continuous sounds of explosions could be heard near the connate primordial water. Thousands of small swords were formed and charged towards the connate primordial water. Humph, I'd like to see. How many drops of your connate primordial water can you possibly have? Liao Ke saw the thousands of small swords falling into the connate primordial water and turning back into the 5-elemental spirit Qi. He could sense that Fairy Xia's connate primordial water was not completely suppressing the 5-element swords. The 5-elemental spirit Qi that had turned back into connate primordial water was also disrupting it. In fact, it even clashed with the connate primordial water and turned it into nothingness. Liao Ke understood that as long as his 5-element broken fireflies were sufficient, Fairy Xia's connate primordial water would be depleted sooner or later. Therefore, Liao Ke flapped his wings and diverted most of his energy to Fairy Xia's side. Rinsing Flower Sex Kai Xia greets Martial Uncle Xiong. Fairy Xia controlled the connate primordial water to block Liao Ke's attack while looking at Xianxia Song who had flown below the connate primordial water. Xianxia Song did not stand on ceremony and asked directly, "How many drops of connate primordial water do you have? Your cultivation is still weak. You can lend me some of your connate primordial water." "I'll let Martial Uncle Xiong know," Fairy Xia said anxiously. "I have a lot of connate primordial water, but as for how many drops, I'm not sure." "Great." Xianxia Song was worried that Fairy Xia did not have much connate primordial water, which was why he was so worried. When he heard that Fairy Xia did not know how many drops she had, he was overjoyed. "Quick, give it to me. I've refined the misty tide pearl that contains the connate primordial water together with the connate primordial blood dharma body. I'm unable to give it to Martial Uncle." Fairy Xia did not dare to hide anything and replied hurriedly, "Ah? Refining a magic treasure together with the dharma body? How did you come up with such an unimaginable method?" Xianxia Song was in disbelief. This is the first time I've heard of this." Li Zongbao, who was at the side, was silent. Naturally, he could not speak. It was just a sudden idea," Fairy Xia said softly. "Oh well." Xianxia Song knew that this was not the time to ask too many questions. He said hurriedly, "When you release the connate primordial water, will it be able to completely block off the 5-colored light?" Fairy Xia knew what Xianxia Song was referring to. She raised her head and looked at it. Biting her lips, she thought for a while and said, "I'll try my best." "Great." Xianxia Song clapped his hands again and said, "Release the dharma body and control the misty tide pearl to release the connate primordial water, blocking off the 5-colored light. You'll have done a great service." "It's that simple?" Fairy Xia could not believe it. "Of course it's that simple." Xianxia Song smiled and said, Once you block off the eye of the splitting-edge 5-elemental sword formation, those darn flying swords will not be able to be produced. Then, our talismans will be able to be used. With the talismans, their 5-elemental swords will be nothing. Do you understand? I understand. Fairy Xianxia nodded hurriedly. Martial Uncle Xiong. Li Zongbao, who was at the side, narrowed his eyes and reminded, Junior Sister Xianxia is only a Foundation Establishment middle-stage disciple. Even if she can control the connate primordial water, she can't possibly block off the 5-elemental sword's disc all by herself, right? Why don't we find a few more disciples who have connate items to refine magic treasures? It won't be too late to do that. How can a magic treasure refined by a connate item compare to a connate item? Xiong Huasong waved his hand and said, Besides, a connate item won't be of much use. If martial niece Xianxia has a few drops of connate primordial water, we won't have to place our hopes on her. But Li Zongbao still shook his head. Junior Sister Xianxia released the Dharma body, she will definitely be attacked by the 5-elemental swords. With us guarding by her side, what else can she do? Xiong Huasong replied without hesitation. Li Zongbao originally wanted to say, You guys are already in a sorry state, how can you care about others? However, Xiong Huasong was after all a golden core master, and Li Zongbao did not dare to offend him. Then, Li Zongbao said again, If Junior Sister Xianxia covers up the eye of the formation, there are 6 grade 2 illusory swordsmen at the eye of the formation, Senior Sister Xianxia. Martial niece Zongbao. Xiong Huasong said coldly, This is an urgent matter. In the time that you have asked these few questions, thousands of disciples have already fallen in my sect. Even if martial niece Xianxia is in danger of dying, which one do you think is more suitable to exchange her death for the lives of hundreds of thousands of disciples? Li Zongbao was silent, and his eyebrows twitched slightly. Junior will go. Fairy Xianxia knew that Xiong Huasong's words were cruel and heartless. If she wanted to protect herself, she would definitely not risk her life. However, since she was already trapped in the sword formation, and since she had already joined the battle, she would encounter many things that were beyond her control. Hence, she would not be able to make a choice. I will accompany you, Li Zongbao said helplessly. He also knew that this was probably the best choice. Senior brother Li, you don't have to come over. Since Fairy Xianxia had already made her decision, she said indifferently, Junior Sister is going to release the Dharma body. Under the primordial water, I cannot take care of others. Senior brother, it is better for you to leave this place. Li Zongbao nodded and reminded, Be careful. Junior Sister knows. Fairy Xianxia nodded. After hesitating for a moment she said, If anything happens to Junior Sister, you must inform him. Let him take revenge for me. Don't worry. Definitely. Li Zongbao's words were concise, and he immediately escaped from the Xiantian primordial water. Xiong Huasong, who was standing by the side, was stunned. He saw Li Zongbao defending Fairy Xianxia, and thought that Li Zongbao had feelings for her. Who knew that Fairy Xianxia had left her last words for someone who was not Li Zongbao, and even wanted that person to take revenge for her. What was even stranger was that Li Zongbao actually agreed to it, as though he would definitely take revenge for Fairy Xianxia. At that moment, Xiong Huasong's heart skipped a beat. That he couldn't be some nascent soul stage master? Even if it is a nascent soul stage master. So what? Xiong Huasong steeled his heart. Since things have come to this, even if a nascent soul stage master blames me, he can't do anything to me. Let's go. Xiong Huasong also flew out of the Xiantian primordial water. That half-nascent soul stage hand that was swaying in midair was still being attacked by many flying swords, and it was barely holding on. A phoenix cry resounded through the 9 heavens, and an ice phoenix celestial body flew out from Fairy Xia's body. Above that misty green ice phoenix celestial body, strands of water-type heaven and earth spiritual chi condensed. Those slanted eyes of the ice phoenix celestial body flashed with a cold brilliance, and a domineering aura surged out from the ice phoenix celestial body. Seeing that the ice phoenix celestial body was released, the mutated peacock that Liao Ke had transformed into also raised its neck and cried out. The same cry shook the surroundings, as though it wanted to compete with the ice phoenix. Not only that, as Liao Kei's wings flapped, an endless hurricane was created, and waves after waves of 5 elemental swords flew towards the Ice Phoenix celestial body. Chapter 2675. Fairy Xia's Ice Phoenix celestial body had already been partially damaged by the Yin Yang sword array. Now that the Ice Phoenix celestial body was released, an indescribable pain was transmitted into Fairy Xia's body, causing her to tremble uncontrollably. Fellow Taoists, quick, block this sword light. Xianxia waved his hand, no longer holding back the dermic powers in his body. His nascent soul's hand waved, and many rays of light flashed, wanting to block in front of Fairy Xia. Xiang Ming and the rest scrambled to be the first, hurriedly waving their talismans to protect Fairy Xia, their only hope of breaking the array. Jie! The Ice Phoenix celestial body cried out again, not without pain. From the Ice Phoenix's mouth, the connate primordial water gushed out like an upside-down waterfall, instantly covering an area of more than 100 feet. Ah! Liao Kei was really shocked. It was not that ordinary, and the rest did not consider connate items when they set up the splitting-edge 5-element sword array, but how could rare connate items be so easy to obtain? Just as Li Zongbao said, there would definitely be someone among the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators who would have such treasures. But any treasure that had 1 or 2 drops, or even 1 or 2 wisps, would be considered extremely lucky. How could they have thought of that? Fairy Xia's connate primordial water could not be measured with drops. It could be measured with 10 feet, 10 feet. Of course, Fairy Xia was still fine. If Xiaohua were here, not to mention connate primordial water, even a connate jellyfish would be able to scare Liao Kei to death. Not good. While Liao Kei was screaming in his heart, Xianghua and the rest were overjoyed. A few of them flew up and surrounded Fairy Xia. They did not hope to kill Liao Kei, but as long as they could protect Fairy Xia, this array would definitely be broken. Indeed, Fairy Xia did not disappoint them. Although the Ice Phoenix celestial body flapped its wings with some difficulty, the 100 feet of Xiantian primordial water grew larger and larger. It was like a blue wave that mended the heavens, smoothly supporting the falling fireflies. Although the splitting-edge 5-elemental sword formation was very strange, as every part of the formation could condense sword light out of thin air and form flying swords, to a golden core cultivator, the most threatening thing was still the swarming fireflies in the eye of the formation. Fairy Xia's primordial water blocked these fireflies, causing the 5 elemental swords to be annihilated by the primordial water. Very quickly, the spirit talismans produced by the golden core cultivators began to shine brilliantly again. At this time, the golden core cultivators really couldn't care less about holding anything back. Although the hand of a nascent soul required a large amount of heaven and earth spiritual qi, which was far from what the formation could provide, they still channeled their true essence from their golden cores and poured their magic power into the talisman. Liao Kei could no longer hold back. With a cry, its body expanded rapidly, and with a flap of its wings, it shot towards the Ice Phoenix celestial body like a shooting star. Rumble, with a loud sound, the peacock slammed into the spirit talisman protecting Fairy Xia. This strange peacock was really strong, to be able to knock the nascent soul's hand askew and rush out of the gap. The Ice Phoenix celestial body cried out in pain. It was the peacock that had stretched out its claws and grabbed onto the wings of the Ice Phoenix celestial body. How strong was the body of the peacock that could knock the nascent soul's hand away? In an instant, it tore off a piece of the Ice Phoenix celestial body's wing. Fairy Xia cried out in pain. Her body trembled violently, and the Ice Phoenix celestial body trembled as well. At the same time, the Ice Phoenix celestial body fell rapidly, as if it wanted to retract into Fairy Xia's body. How dare you! Dasun and Xiang Ming's nascent soul's hands grabbed at the peacock's wings at the same time. The peacock did not dare to delay and hurriedly flapped its wings and flew up. Junior disciple, hold on for a while longer. Xianghua could only encourage Fairy Xia. All right. Fairy Xia replied. She tried her best to stabilize the Ice Phoenix celestial body, and urged the Xiantian true water to wrap around the 5 elements planetary disk. However, the closer it got to the 5 elements planetary disk, the more sword lights there were, and the more Xiantian true water was consumed. Fairy Xia did not care about the consumption of Xiantian true water, but the sword chi from the sword lights was something she could not bear. Fairy Xianxia did not temper her bones like Xiaohua, and her body did not have the strength of 10,000 catties. The sword chi was as heavy as a mountain, and when it collided with the true water, she was unable to take another step forward. Xianghua Song seemed to have noticed the abnormality as well, and hurriedly shouted, "Senior Sister Hongxia, if you have any more true water, surround it from all sides. Just hold on for a while longer." "All right." Fairy Hongxia gritted her teeth. The Ice Phoenix celestial body was already damaged, and several more streams of true water surged out, surrounding the five elements planetary disk. The peacock was sent flying by the Yuanying stage's hand. It soared in mid-air, and with a long cry, it swooped down again. However, a loud explosion sounded, and Fairy Hongxia's Xiantian true water was completely shattered by this explosion. The Ice Phoenix celestial body could not hold on any longer, and quickly retreated into Fairy Hongxia's body. The impact of this explosion also injured Fairy Hongxia, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face was pale, and she almost fainted in mid-air. Amidst the explosion, countless sword lights scattered. The five-colored light had already dispersed, and the five giant swords and the five elements planetary disk were scattered in mid-air. What made Xianghua Song and the rest happy was that the five flying swords were much dimmer than before. They must have used up a lot of energy to activate this sword formation. "Fellow Taoists, this is the best time to kill this fiend." Hang waved the spirit talisman in his hand, and the giant hand flashed in mid-air, grabbing at one of the flying swords. The powerful restrictive force immediately passed through space, and covered the giant hand. "That's right. Kill!" Xiang Ming shouted, and several golden core spirit talismans swayed as they flew over. "Ha ha ha," a shrill voice sounded out. "We have been setting up this formation for 8 years, and we wanted to kill 100,000 cultivators. Who knew that the heavens were unfair, and the formation was broken by a foundation establishment cultivator. I am not resigned to this. I will not yield." As he spoke, the giant yellow-red sword light suddenly shone brightly. It was the transformation of the white and fat swordswoman. What is there to love in life? What is there to fear in death? End here, sword domain, transforming into a sword to support the snowy mountains. The giant green sword also let out a hearty laugh, and then light scattered in all directions. "Fellow swordsmen." The five elements planetary disk gradually revealed its ordinary figure, and its plain face revealed a look of shock. Even Liao Ke, who was far away, was shocked. "We swore to kill 100,000 cultivators, and now there are only a few tens of thousands left. How can we meet LV Jianghu? How can we meet the fallen swordsman of sword domain?" Within the pitch-black sword light, Bai Tianming's voice was extremely solemn as he said, "We have made up our minds. Fellow swordsmen, there is no need to stop us. Ha ha ha, the three-sword sect is already like this. How can we not follow?" Xiao Jinding's arrogant voice also came from the silver-white sword light. There was no movement within the giant blue sword, but the sword light suddenly shone brightly. This was Luo Shuilan's will. "Enough, enough, enough!" Ordinary shouted. "If you don't have my help, how are you going to kill 100,000 cultivators?" As he spoke, Ordinary's figure disappeared again, and the five elements planetary disk shone with bright starlight. "Oh no!" Dasun and the rest were shocked. Knowing that the swordsman was going to fight like a cornered beast, they quickly withdrew the spirit talismans in their hands. At this moment, the pitch-black sword light flashed rapidly, flying towards Fairy Hongxia. "I will kill this woman first." "Dodge!" Xiang Ming shouted hurriedly, activating the spirit talisman in his hand. However, he was already retreating, and if he hurriedly activated it again, how could he block the giant sword in time? In an instant, the sword light had arrived beside Fairy Hongxia. How could Fairy Hongxia possibly dodge such an attack that was comparable to a sword? "Xiao Hua!" Fairy Hongxia's body was already supporting herself in mid-air. At this moment, her face was calm as she closed her eyes and murmured. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua was now trapped in the Brahma Golden Palace, fighting with Yu Tong. How could he appear here? "How dare you hurt my Dao sect disciple?" Just as Fairy Hongxia was about to die, a loud shout came from the side. It was Li Zongbao, who was guarding the left side. The immortal piercing whip was like a dragon as it struck towards the giant sword. Of course, Li Zongbao was only in the late foundation establishment stage, and the Immortal piercing whip was only in the early golden core stage. It could not block a sword attack, but how could Li Zongbao not use the Immortal piercing whip? Boom! With a loud sound, the Immortal piercing whip was like a lonely golden dragon as it was struck by the sword. However, the sword was also struck by the huge force of the Immortal piercing whip. It brushed past Fairy Hongxia's robe and flew out. Bai Tianming was also at the point where he was about to die. Lucky! Xiangming exclaimed in his heart. However, Li Zongbao spat out a mouthful of blood and his body withered in mid-air. Big Senior Li! Fairy Hongxia broke out in cold sweat and hurriedly flew down. She touched her storage bag and took out the elixirs given to her by Xiao Hua. She hurriedly took one for herself and gave another to Li Zongbao. I have my own. Li Zongbao waved his hand and rejected her flatly. Xiao Hua gave this to me. Fairy Hongxia said hurriedly. Li Zongbao looked at the ugly elixir in Fairy Hongxia's hand and frowned slightly. He whispered, "Oh." It was as if he had understood something, but also as if he was confused. However, Li Zongbao took it without hesitation and swallowed it. However, before he could circulate his energy to dissolve the elixir, he heard 5 consecutive loud explosions. 5 balls of sword light rushed wildly from 5 different directions towards the surrounding cultivators. At the same time, under the activation of the 5 elements planetary disk, countless 5-colored sword lights rushed out from the ground. These sword lights were attracted by the 5 balls of sword light and turned into 5 element swords that were a few feet long. They stabbed wildly towards the Dao sect cultivators. This last bloodbath of the 5 element swords formation was 10 times more powerful than the previous one. The individual sword lights were several times faster than the previous one. The power of the sword chi was also several times stronger. In just a moment, continuous screams could be heard everywhere and blood was everywhere. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the continuous 5-colored sword lights gradually disappeared. Chapter 2676. When they looked at the sky again, the strange peacock had already flown away. The 5 elements planet plate also did not transform into an ordinary body. With a flash in the sky, it disappeared just like how it had appeared before. No one knew where it went. Calm down, calm down. Seeing the sorrowful scene, the group of Dao sect practitioners did not know what to do. There were even many disciples with strong Dao hearts who were hysterical. They looked around with red eyes, as if they were about to attack at any time. Heng Zhao and the rest knew that the minds of these disciples had been invaded by the madness of the 6 sword practitioners. How would they dare to be negligent? They hurriedly flew into the sky and shouted, "The sword practitioners' formation has been broken by us. Take some pills and meditate for a while." More than 10 golden core cultivators stood in 4 different directions and cried out anxiously. The other golden core early stage and late stage foundation establishment disciples also came to their senses and flew to different directions, comforting the disciples of the various sects one by one. Cough cough. Senior brothers, junior brothers. Li Zongbao slowly flew up, his body covered in blood. His voice was a little hoarse and low, but his tone was firm. We have broken this formation. 5 second-grade illusory swordsmen are nothing more than this. Compared to the 3rd-grade illusory sword Qin Jian, they are far inferior. With that said, Li Zongbao pointed at Fairy Hongxia, who was not far away, and smiled. It's Fairy Hongxia from Huanhua sect. It's our junior sister, who is only at the middle foundation establishment stage, who broke the so-called 5-element splitting-edge sword formation by herself. Think about it. How powerful can sword practitioners be? Didn't they just rely on an encirclement? Didn't they just have hundreds of thousands of swordsmen hiding in the dark? How can those cowardly swordsmen, who do not dare to fight openly with us Taoist sect cultivators, be a match for us? Fairy Hongxia's face was slightly red, and she immediately understood Li Zongbao's meaning. She hurriedly flew to Li Zongbao's side and smiled. That smile was so shy that it made Zijihua blush. Senior brothers, although we are in danger and have exhausted our powers, we can still break through this formation. But, with just my own dermic powers, I can break this array. There's no other reason. My Dao sect has countless dermic spells, and none of them are something that the barbarian sword cultivators of Huan country can touch. Isn't this 5-elemental sword array my Dao sect's 5-elemental array? Little sister had only used a few drops of innate primordial water to break their formation. Little sister really didn't know what to say anymore. These 5 illusory swordsmen were probably too ashamed to meet their master, so they had no choice but to self-detonate. Ha ha ha, even though Fairy Xianxia repeated Li Zongbao's words a lot, and even some of her words did not convey her meaning, the last sentence made everyone laugh out loud. Although the comforting words of Hang Zhao and the others were somewhat effective, they were golden core cultivators after all. Their mental state was different from that of most foundation establishment cultivators. It was a form of intimidation that came from above. But Fairy Xianxia was different. She was only a female cultivator in the later stages of foundation establishment. She looked extremely beautiful, and even seemed a little weak. If a female cultivator like her was not afraid, the male cultivators' hearts would naturally be filled with a desire to win, and even a determination to protect her. Therefore, Fairy Xia's words were much more effective than Hang Zhao and the rest's comforting words. The group of cultivators gradually calmed down, and the faith in their hearts was restored. After all, everyone had seen with their own eyes that Fairy Xianxia had controlled the innate primordial water to force the 5 elements planetary disk to respond. Just a drop of innate primordial water was enough to break the eye of the array. What about innate primordial fire? What about other innate items? They must be able to do it too. And these items were not rare in the hands of cultivators. If Fairy Xianxia could do it, they naturally believed that they could do it as well. It was just that they were too far away from the 5 elements planetary disk. Faith was the most magical thing. For example, Zhong Pei and the rest had consumed spiritual seeds. Although they could change their physiques according to the spiritual seeds in order to adapt to the changes in the heaven and earth spiritual qi, this adaptation was useful for ordinary people. To them, it had little effect. But why did their cultivation progress so rapidly? It was because they believed that they could succeed. They believed that they could rely on the spiritual seeds and Taoist Zhao's magical cultivation to succeed. Therefore, they succeeded. This could be explained by a firm Dao heart. Everyone in the sword formation was the same. Previously, their Dao hearts had been destroyed by the bloodbath. After Fairy Xia's words, they changed their minds. Their Dao hearts were strengthened, and the entire sword formation was stabilized. Even the morale of the cultivators was boosted. Great! Heng Zhao and the rest heaved a long sigh of relief. Heng Zhao looked at Li Zongbao with gratification, and then looked deeply at Fairy Xianxia. His eyes shone with a trace of brilliance. Xiangming was even more delighted. The credit for breaking the formation belonged to the Huanhua sect. After Li Zongbao's words and Fairy Xia's encouragement, the morale of the entire battlefield changed, and the name of the Huanhua sect became even more resounding. The Huanhua sect, which had always been lukewarm in the battle of Dao cultivators, was now famous. Besides the Utmost Happiness faction, Imperial Thunder faction, Xuanyan school, Shen Tian sect, and other famous disciples, the Huanhua sect was not to be outdone. Of course, Xiangming looked at Fairy Xianxia and Li Zongbao thoughtfully. But how would Fairy Xianxia know about this? She looked at Li Zongbao's bloodstains and thought for a while. She clapped her hands and took out a jade bottle. She whispered, "Senior brother Li, can you take another pill?" If Fairy Xianxia had not mentioned this, Li Zongbao might not have thought of it. But when he saw Fairy Xia's jade bottle, Li Zongbao activated his heart skill again, and his face was immediately filled with astonishment. "Junior sister Xianxia, this pill. How many more do you have?" Li Zongbao asked, puzzled. "Oh." Fairy Xianxia was naturally stunned. "Senior brother Li, senior sister Xianxia." At this moment, Xiao Mao's voice came from afar. This guy was also covered in blood and looked even worse than Li Zongbao. But his face was filled with joy and even excitement. You're not dead too." Li Zongbao nodded lightly. "Why did you only come to find me now?" Xiao Mao was used to Li Zongbao's indifference. He bowed slightly to the two of them and smiled. "I've been wanting to find Senior Brother Li for a long time so that you can protect me. But this sword array is really messy. I don't dare to walk around blindly. I can only follow my fellow brothers. Just now when senior brother Li and senior sister Xianxia broke the 5-element sword array, I saw the two of you. Plus, the dozens of senior brothers who joined forces with me were all killed. I had no choice but to find senior brother Li. There must be another sword array after this one. You can follow me. Fairy Xianxia knew that Xiao Mao and Xiao Hua had some connections. She nodded slightly. Thank you, senior sister. Xiao Mao said hurriedly. Give it to me. Li Zongbao stretched out his hand and said to Xiao Mao, puzzled. What? Xiao Mao scratched his head. Elixir. The elixir that Xiao Hua gave you. Li Zongbao seemed to be a man of few words. Xiao Mao understood. He took out a jade bottle and handed it to Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao took the jade bottle and crushed it. He looked inside and sniffed it. He frowned slightly and raised his head. Is there more? Xiao Mao couldn't take it anymore. He whispered, Big brother Xiao gave this to me in private. I heard that it was an elixir that he obtained with great difficulty. Senior brother Li only needs one. Nonsense, is there more? Li Zongbao couldn't be bothered to beat around the bush and asked directly. Xiao Mao felt wronged and whispered, There is more. But this is my life-saving item. Just now, I almost died. Senior brother Li, why do you need so many elixirs? Fairy Xianxia was also surprised. She couldn't understand why Li Zongbao was so strong. She didn't know that Li Zongbao's parting love treasure mirror had already been completed. You and I are just foundation establishment disciples. In the future, we still have to rely on golden core masters to break the array. Li Zongbao only said this and didn't say anything else. Fairy Xianxia and Xiao Mao weren't stupid. They understood immediately. The two of them thought for a while and each took out a few more jade bottles from their storage bags and handed them to Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao took them and said calmly, I will only give these to the golden core masters and say that they are for the two of you. I won't say anything else. As for the senior uncles of Huanhua sect and Xuanyan sect, you can give them to them yourselves. As he spoke, he turned and flew into the air. Xiao Hua didn't give senior brother Li any elixirs? Once Li Zongbao left, Fairy Xianxia whispered to Xiao Mao. This, I don't know. Xiao Mao was a little embarrassed. He didn't know if Li Zongbao had any. However, it was obvious that Li Zongbao didn't have any. Even if he did, it wouldn't be such a good elixir. Is senior brother Li angry? Xiao Mao asked tentatively. How would I know? Fairy Xianxia pursed her lips. She was a little embarrassed and angry at Xiao Hua's stinginess. Seeing Fairy Xianxia turn and fly towards Xiangming, Xiao Mao also took out a few elixirs and flew towards Gao Wei. Li Zongbao's prediction was right. Many golden core cultivators had used the golden core in their dantian to forcefully activate their talismans. Their meridians and golden core were damaged. It was just that the situation just now was dangerous and no one dared to be careless. There were even a few who did the same thing as Bai Tianming, and the rest when they were in a desperate situation. Who would care about that little bit of damage? But at this moment, when they were adjusting their breathing, they felt that there was something wrong with their meridians. If it was a normal situation, they could just meditate and recuperate for a few days. But now it was a matter of life and death. If they didn't rush out of the sword array, they could die at any time. No one dared to underestimate these injuries. Just as the group of golden core cultivators were thinking about which elixirs to consume, Li Zongbao presented the elixirs. Naturally, he gave them to Heng first. Hang Ju said with a smile, Master saw it all. Give this elixir to the other uncle masters. Master has another elixir here. Master, you take it. Li Zongbao didn't explain. I just took it. It's better than the elixirs of our sect. Oh. Heng raised his eyebrows and looked at Fairy Xianxia and Xiao Mao who were flying towards their respective sections. However, he had always trusted this disciple of his. He didn't hesitate and reached out to take it. But just as he was about to consume it, he was stunned. The appearance of this elixir was really too ugly. Chapter 2678. This ugly pill did not even have a hint of medicinal fragrance. What kind of pill was this? However, When Heng Zhao saw the faint runes on the surface of the pill, his eyes flashed with surprise. Master, take it first. Everything can wait until after the battle. Li Zongbao did not hesitate to cut off Heng Zhao's line of questioning. All right. Heng Zhao swallowed it immediately. Indeed, after a short while, Heng Zhao's eyebrows trembled uncontrollably. Master, give it to the other uncle masters. Li Zongbao held up the jade bottle and said, This is the pill obtained by junior sister Xianxia from Huanhua sect and junior brother Xiao Mao from Xuanyan sect. Come with me. Heng Zhao sighed in his heart and did not take the pill. He turned around and flew towards Dasun. Li Zongbao knew that his master was doing this for his own good. Even though the pill was not his, if he gave it to the other uncle masters, he would owe him a huge favor. However, Li Zongbao's expression did not change as he flew behind Heng Zhao. Xiangming had already taken the pill. When he saw Fairy Xianxia flying over, he smiled and said, Junior sister Xianxia, you can keep this pill for yourself. As he spoke, he looked at Li Zongbao who was following Heng Zhao to distribute the pills. He said, This favor should have been yours. However, if you are willing to give it to Li Zongbao, I will not say anything. You have contributed so much in the battle and Li Zongbao has also contributed greatly. You don't have to say anything to your master. Even if the sect leader comes forward, I will agree. Ah? Fairy Xianxia was taken aback. Her face flushed red. She had not expected Xiangming to have such thoughts. However, just as Fairy Xianxia was about to explain, a sigh came from behind her. Sigh, junior sister Xianxia. This old woman has failed you. Fairy Xianxia quickly turned around and saw that it was Mingyu. However, there were only a few disciples behind Mingyu. Ji Mingxiu and the rest were not among them. Fairy Xianxia immediately understood. Ji Mingxiu had most likely perished. As expected, Mingyu smiled bitterly. The five-element sword formation was really fierce just now. My powers are limited and I cannot absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from outside. Hence, I could not take care of so many disciples. Uncle Master Mingyu. Fairy Xiaxia's heart turned sour as she whispered, To be able to protect you until now, junior apprentice sister Ji and the others have already. At this point, Fairy Xianxia could no longer speak. The smiling faces of Ji Mingxiu and the others kept appearing in her mind. Martial uncle, this is a type of spirit pill that disciple obtained. Please take it. Fairy Xianxia obediently passed the elixir to Mingyu. I hope that martial aunt will be able to protect even more disciples after consuming it. Yes. Because Bright Moon had protected so many Foundation establishment disciples, she had sustained some internal injuries and had not had the time to consume any pills. Now that she saw Fairy Xianxia offering her a gift, she accepted it without hesitation. Naturally, when she saw this ugly pill, she had the same expression as Heng Ting. It seemed like judging a person by their appearance and judging a pill by their appearance were all the same. Luckily, Mingyu took into account Fairy Xiaxia's eagerness and reluctantly swallowed it. After Mingyu consumed the pill, her face instantly blossomed with surprise. Female cultivators were never as profound as male cultivators. Mingyu immediately asked curiously, What pill is this? Why is it so effective? I don't know. Fairy Xianxia said with a smile, I obtained it by accident. This spirit pill is even more miraculous than the 9 transformation cloud spirit pill of my Huanhua sect. Mingyu asked in disbelief, Where did you get it? At a market in Sky Patrol City. Fairy Xianxia was proud in her heart, but her face was expressionless. Give me one. Xiangming had to take it seriously. Yes. Fairy Xianxia took out another pill and smiled. I only have a few left. Yes, I understand. Xiangming nodded. After taking it, he looked at it and sniffed it, then said softly, This looks similar to the spring return pill from Sky Patrol City. Yes, I also thought that it was the spring return pill. Fairy Xianxia said immediately, Therefore, I used all I had to snatch many spirit pills. Then, Fairy Xianxia said regretfully, It's a pity that this is not the spring return pill. Even if it's not the spring return pill, it must have been refined by the mysterious alchemy master. Xiangming took the pill and turned to look for Heng Zhao. Just now, Fairy Xianxia had given it to him, but he had rejected it. Now, He had taken it, completely ignoring what Fairy Xianxia had said. My fellow cultivator Hang Zhao, the spirit pill of my Huanhua sect is indeed extraordinary. Xiang Ming shouted from afar. I think it's the work of the mysterious alchemy master. Hang Zhao rolled his eyes and almost said, I've already said that I'm a disciple of the Huanhua sect and the Xuanyan sect. You don't have to make such a big fuss. However, Hang Zhao still said calmly, Yes, we've all taken it. This spirit pill is indeed extraordinary. My fellow cultivator Xiang, you've already known before taking it? Well, of course I know the efficacy of the elixirs made by the disciples of the Huanhua sect. Xiang Ming kept mentioning the Huanhua sect proudly. De Sun looked at Fairy Xianxia, who was not far away, and smiled. Previously, Li Zongbao from the Utopia sect, Xiao Mao from the Xuanyan sect, and Xiao Hua from the Imperial Thunder sect killed Qin Jian. Now, Fairy Xianxia of the Huanhua sect has broken the array and made a contribution. She even gave us golden core cultivators a spirit pill. We owe her a debt of gratitude. This is a great contribution. Hee hee, Xiang Ming could not stop smiling. De Sun knew that Xiao Mao was also part of the Xuanyan sect's spirit pill. Since Gao Wei was not around, he did not bring Xiao Mao along. After a while, many of the golden core cultivators had taken the spirit pills. Hang Zhao looked at the disciples resting in the sword array and said worriedly, Everyone, this 5-element splitting-edge sword array has been broken by us. But we're still in the sword array. If the swordsmen suddenly attack, I'm afraid we won't be able to handle it. Hee hee, I'd like them to attack. Xiong Huasong laughed coldly. If the sword cultivators abandon the sword array and attack directly, it'll be our fortune. Hang Zhao thought for a moment and knew that Xiong Huasong's words made sense. He had not thought it through. He nodded and said, Brother Xiong, you're indeed an expert in array formations. I can't compare to you. Everyone has their own strengths. Xiong Huasong said politely. We'd like to see what kind of sword array LV Ruochong has set up after the 5-element splitting-edge sword array. Previously, the Yin-Yang sword array was targeted at disciples below the foundation establishment stage. This 5-element splitting-edge sword array seems to be targeted at disciples above the foundation establishment stage. I'm afraid that the next sword array will face us golden core cultivators directly. At this point, Xiong Huasong's tone changed and he said in a strange tone, But I'm curious. What kind of strange sword array can a sword cultivator have that can kill us golden core cultivators? Was there no such thing in the previous battle? Hang Zhao asked softly. Of course there was. Xiong Huasong said weakly. But there were no records of the Yin-Yang sword array and the 5-element splitting-edge sword array. Therefore, I don't have a good way to break it. Therefore this Xiong will be very... Xiong Huasong wanted to say that he was looking forward to it, but he felt that it was inappropriate. He could only listen and change his tone. Fellow Taoist Hang Ming, you'd better take a look at the damage of these 2 arrays first. We'll also be able to calm ourselves and prepare for the new sword array. Hang Zhao was a little troubled. How many layers does this sword array have? I really don't know. Maybe it's already gone. Maybe there will be more in the future. Xiong Huasong shrugged as if he didn't say anything. Then, Hang Zhao instructed Li Zongbao to find disciples to check on the casualties of the cultivators. In addition, he sent a golden core cultivator to lead a dozen late-stage foundation establishment disciples to scout ahead. Now that the array had been broken to this extent, Hang Zhao and the rest were really going all out. They no longer charged blindly outside like before. They could only conserve their energy and prepare to face the enemies who had been lying in ambush for 8 years. Hang Zhao's heart ached at the thought of 8 years. This kind of planning was definitely not something he could do. Not long after, Li Zongbao flew over with a gloomy expression. Hang Zhao's heart skipped a beat when he saw his disciple who practiced the parting treasured mirror in such a state. Master. Li Zongbao transmitted his voice to him. Now our Dao sect disciples still have more than 160,000. Ah? How did we lose so many? Although Hang Zhao already had a premonition, he couldn't help but be shocked when he heard this shocking number. According to what I know, in the earliest Yin-Yang sword array, our Dao sect disciples lost close to 90,000 people. Most of them were Qi refinement and early-stage foundation establishment disciples. There were also a few golden core uncle masters. Li Zongbao said bitterly. And in the 5-element sword array just now, although there were no golden core uncle masters killed, we lost more than 100,000 people. Especially the last 5 cultivators of the second stage of the illusory sword realm. More than 40,000 people died. Hiss, Hang Zhao couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The 10-direction annihilation array was already very powerful, but he had never heard Xianxia Song arrogantly say that it could kill 40,000 swordsmen in one go. This sword array killed 40,000 cultivators in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. The sword array is indeed a great weapon. It's really different from an array. Hang Zhao murmured. He couldn't help but feel a trace of regret in his heart. Master. Li Zongbao immediately understood Hang Zhao's thoughts. He said anxiously, "You don't have to blame yourself. Lu Ruochang has been lying in ambush here for more than 8 years. Even if you didn't command the disciples to pursue, she would definitely have released the bait." So, with that, Li Zongbao glanced at the other golden core cultivators and transmitted his voice again. According to the Uncle Master's thoughts, they would definitely pursue, chase and beat the dog in the water. But Hang Zhao still wanted to say something. But Li Zongbao didn't wait for him to finish. He said, "Defeat and success are due to this battle. Master, now we have no way out. If we break this sword array, we will have our lives and Master's reputation will be established. If this sword array is not broken, all of this is meaningless. Master, don't think too much." Chapter 2679. That's right. Hang Zhao exhaled deeply and turned to look into the distance. Master, you're overthinking. Sometimes you even think of Qian Mo from the Imperial Thunder Sect. Master, Uncle Qian is Uncle Qian, and you are you. Although Li Zongbao was shocked, he still pretended to be indifferent. Uncle Qian thinks too much and does too little. Even what he can do is too little. You're on duty in the conference hall and have been entrusted by the sect leader. You just have to do what you want. Who would be without fault? Our Utopia faction has the capital to support Master's mistakes. But the Imperial Thunder Sect doesn't. Hearing this, Hang Zhao felt relieved. He was really too involved to see the situation clearly. Li Zongbao's last sentence reminded him. Yes, even if he killed hundreds of thousands of disciples, then so what? He Ping Zhenren would never punish him. Hang Zhao's mind was set. He immediately whispered, "That's strange. We've been breaking the 5-element sword formation for so long. Why? Why haven't we heard the sound of the sword formation? Could it be that all the great arrays have been broken?" Li Zongbao thought for a moment and whispered, "That's possible. The Yin-Yang sword formation is more than 10 miles wide. Our Taoist sect lost nearly 100,000 people, and there are at least 300,000 swordsmen. The 5-element sword formation, our Taoist sect lost nearly 150,000 people, and there are even more swordsmen. How could there not be at least 400,000? That's 700,000 swordsmen. Where did the Huan Kingdom get so many swordsmen? Even if they did, would they be willing to invest? A sword formation is different from a magic formation." Han Ming smiled. "Moreover, we broke out from the same direction and didn't disperse our forces. The sword cultivators didn't really need to surround us with 300,000 swordsmen. I feel that 200,000 swordsmen would be enough. If they really had 700,000, they would have killed their way out long ago. Why would they need to set up a sword formation?" "Haha, you're right, Master. I've learned a lot." Li Zongbao saw Hang Zhao smile and felt relieved. Besides, until now, LV Ruochang and the other swordsmen of level 3 of the illusory sword realm are still missing. I'm afraid that they were seriously injured in the 10-party annihilation formation and can't hold the fort. If they come out now, we really don't know how to deal with them. Forget it, you, Fairy Xianxia, and Xiao Mao should make some preparations. There are some things that I know you can't do, but you have to do them. However, you must be clear in your heart that you should try your best not to do these things. After all, the Great Tao is the most important thing." "Oh, what?" Li Zongbao was stunned. Hang Zhao's, but, try your best, made him a little confused. Unfortunately, Hang Ming did not explain. He turned around and flew towards Dasun and the others. Do you still have any medicinal pills? Li Zongbao flew to the side of Fairy Xianxia and Xiao Mao. Some of the Foundation establishment stage disciples around the two of them tactfully dispersed. Li Zongbao said to the two of them without any trace of politeness. There are still some left. Fairy Xianxia had already told Li Zongbao. Now that he asked again, she hurriedly transmitted her voice. If senior brother Li wants some, I'll give them to you. Senior brother, don't be angry with Xiao Hua. It's not that Xiao Hua doesn't want to give some to senior brother Li. I'm afraid he doesn't have much left himself. Give me one first. Li Zongbao said coldly. When I see that bastard, I'll settle the score with him. Hee. Seeing that Fairy Xia's face was a little ugly, Xiao Mao hurriedly took out a jade bottle and passed it to Li Zongbao. He smiled and said, Senior brother Li has always been cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Senior sister Xianxia, don't mind me. I've benefited a lot from following senior brother Li. Li Zongbao did not stand on ceremony. He took the medicinal pills and said lightly, the special task force of the conference hall originally had 3 people. Now that Xiao Hua is not around, junior sister Xianxia is his replacement. There's only one person left and right. The 3 of us will break through the formation together. Yes. Xiao Mao was overjoyed. However, Fairy Xia's face was flushed red. When Li Zongbao said, there's only one person left and right, he only meant that whether it was Xiao Hua or Fairy Xianxia, they were all one person. However, in her ears, it was one person, 2 people, one person. How embarrassing. Li Zongbao did not think too much about it. He flicked his sleeves and flew away. Xiao Mao stood guard beside Fairy Xianxia respectfully. When the blush on Fairy Xia's face faded, he accompanied her and chased after Li Zongbao. Xiao Mao was clear that although Fairy Xia's cultivation was higher than his and she had the protection of the innate primordial water, he still had to help Fairy Xianxia guard against sudden attacks from sword cultivators. Even if he died, he could not let Fairy Xianxia be hurt in the slightest. The relationship between Fairy Xianxia and Xiao Hua was still unclear. However, Xiao Mao could still remember the scene of Fairy Xianxia and Xiao Hua meeting each other. He could not repay Xiao Hua much, but if he could protect Fairy Xianxia, it was also his own goodwill. In fact, sometimes it was not important how much one could do. The key was the kind of goodwill that was extremely important. Hung Jiao flew to Dasun's side and looked at the group of golden core cultivators. The smile on his face disappeared and he said, Fellow cultivators, have you rested well? We have already broken through 2 sword formations. I'm afraid there will be a fierce battle ahead. LV Ruochang and the other 3rd-grade illusory swordsmen have not appeared yet. We should hurry. If these strong cultivators recover, we... At this point, Hung Ji's expression suddenly changed slightly. That's right. Since the first 2 sword formations were targeted at Qi refinement and foundation establishment, then the sword formation at the back would naturally target golden core cultivators. Wouldn't LV Ruochang and the others be waiting in front? Dasun and the rest naturally understood. On the other hand, Xiong Huasong was very clear about his own formation. He smiled and said, Fellow cultivator Hang Ming, you worry too much. Even if LV Ruochang and the rest took the elixir that Martial Nephew Zongbao brought, they would need a few days to recover. I dare to guarantee that the one in front is definitely not LV Ruochang. At the same time, Dasun's expression changed and he asked, Fellow cultivator Hang Ming, how are the casualties of our Dao sect cultivators? I haven't heard anything from you yet. This. Hung Jiao pondered for a moment and said in a low voice, Our Dao sect cultivators have suffered heavy casualties. Right now, there are only 160,000 disciples left. Oh? Dasun and the rest's expressions changed and they looked at each other. Why are there so many? Xiong Huasong was a little speechless. If we don't break through the sword formations, these 160,000 disciples will be meat on the chopping block. Hung Jiao was unable to answer. He narrowed his eyes and looked ahead. There was no longer any rain in the sword tomb and there was a slight mist. It was this mist that completely blocked everyone's vision and they could not see far. Let's go. Xiong Huasong did not hesitate and said anxiously, There are still no sword cries. I'm afraid that the sword formations are not ready yet. We have to act quickly. As soon as the golden core cultivators moved, the group of resting foundation building disciples also flew out. There were still quite a few surviving aura refining disciples who had long been impatient. However, their cultivation levels weren't high, so they didn't have any special power to fight back in the sword formation. Most of them relied on luck. They knew that they were flying fast and not skillfully, so they didn't dare to say anything. The remaining 160,000 Dao sect disciples remained in their original small groups. Each sect formed a simple formation and slowly flew up and advanced. Heng Jiao and the other golden core cultivators flew in front, while Li Zongbao and the other disciples followed behind. After flying for a few miles, just as everyone was starting to relax, the disciple who had gone out to scout returned. That golden core cultivator was Qi Ming from the Tai Ching sect. Seeing the strange expression on Qi Ming's face, Heng Jiao's heart skipped a beat. He knew that things were not good. Greetings, senior brother Heng Jiao. Qi Ming bowed. Heng Jiao saw Qi Ming's reaction and felt at ease. He smiled and said, "How was the scouting ahead? Looking at you, could it be that there is no sword formation left?" "That's not it." Qi Ming shook his head and said, "About 2 miles ahead, there are sword cultivators. But from what I see, it can't be considered an ambush. After all, they are. If you have something to say it quickly." Dasun could not help but scold. "Why are you still like this at a time like this?" Qi Ming's face was slightly red. He did not dare to argue with Dasun and said, "I was ordered to bring. Get to the point. What kind of ambush do the sword cultivators have?" Dasun's face was red with anger. He almost scolded him again. "Little brother, I can't say that there is an ambush ahead, but there are more than 10 sword cultivators hovering in mid-air." Qi Ming stuttered. He did not know what to say to satisfy Dasun. "Haha, junior brother Qi, speak slowly. Why are those sword cultivators hovering in mid-air? Are there no other sword cultivators? There is also no sword chi or sword light on the ground." Heng Jiao smiled and said, "I see that you look very relaxed. I don't think this counts as an ambush, right?" Qi Ming heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Exactly. There are more than 10 sword cultivators hovering in mid-air in front of us. However, they are arranged in a strange formation. There is no sword light or sword chi nearby. In fact, there is not even a trace of killing intent. If you say that it is a sword formation, it is definitely not. However, if it is not a sword formation, what is the use of them being in such a formation? What else?" Heng Jiao's interest was piqued. He asked curiously, "They are just looking at you? There is no movement?" "Not only is there no movement, they are treating I as if I am nothing." Qi Ming was a little flustered. It seemed that he was really angry. However, there are a few second-grade illusory sword cultivators among them. I did not dare to act rashly. I only observed from afar and did not dare to approach them. What about the other disciples?" Heng Jiao looked at the few disciples standing respectfully behind Qi Ming. It was obvious that there were fewer of them than the ones he had sent out. He asked, "Didn't you say that you did not make a move?" "Those disciples?" Qi Ming smiled and said, "When I saw that those swordsmen were ignoring us, I sent them to the left and right to go around and scout." "Those swordsmen ignored you?" Dasun frowned. "No. It seems like they did not see us." Qi Ming smiled and said, "When I came back, I already thought about it. Why don't we split up and go around them?" Chapter 2680. You may leave." Dasun waved his hand impatiently. "We have our own plans on how to proceed." "Yes." Qi Ming shook his head and flew to the side. Dasun glanced at Qi Ming and turned to ask, "What do you think, fellow Taoist Heng Ming?" Heng Ming pondered for a moment and frowned. What fellow Taoist Qi said makes sense. But the problem is, how can we avoid them? If these 160,000 people split up, there'll be 80,000 people. It'll be easier for the sword cultivators to defeat them. "Don't listen to his nonsense," Dasun said. "Although there are only a dozen sword cultivators in front, there must be many hidden sword cultivators. Even if these dozen sword cultivators go around these sword cultivators and scout the path behind them, they'll definitely die. If you don't believe me, let's go ahead and take a look. I bet that these disciples won't be able to return. Hee hee, Hang Ming could only laugh foolishly and say no more. Everyone flew forward again. Sure enough, when they were about 2 miles away, there were indeed more than 10 swordsmen in black swordsmanship hovering in the air. These dozen swordsmen stood in groups of 2s and 3s, but the distance between them was different. Every one of them was facing a different direction. Even the height at which they stood in mid-air was different. Only the one standing at the highest point was a slightly hunched, sharp-mouthed old man with a bitter expression. He was facing the 160,000 Dao sect swordsmen. Seeing the dense crowd of cultivators, the old man stretched his back and raised his arms as if he was loosening his bones. Then he said loudly, "I'm Qing Feng from the Quilted Mountain sect. I've been waiting here for a long time." Qing Feng? After ordering the disciples to stop, Hang Ming flew forward and looked around. He said coldly, "There was a person called Qing Jian previously. Could he be your relative?" Qing Feng blinked and snorted. "That's a fellow swordsman from the Three Swords sect. He has nothing to do with me. Whether or not you have anything to do with him, that Qing Jian has already fallen." Hang Ming pointed. "Do you want to follow in his footsteps?" "That's right." A bitter smile appeared on Qing Feng's face. This old man already had this idea when senior brother Tsang Yuan died in the 10-direction annihilation Great Array. "Yes, that's right. Tsang Yuan is also from the Quilted Mountain sect. He's your senior brother." Hung Ju nodded. "However, my Dao sect has always been merciful. If you and I have already suffered many casualties, why don't we stop here and wait for the nascent soul masters to arrive?" Da Sun and the others were not far behind Hung Ju. When they heard Hung Ju's words, they couldn't help but be taken aback. They turned their heads slightly to look at Xiong Huasong. Xiong Huasong raised his head to look at Da Sun. His eyes narrowed slightly as if he was thinking of something. "Ha ha!" Qing Feng raised his head to the sky and laughed. "The Great Array is already here, and you still dare to say such words. Do you think this old man is a 3-year-old child? What a joke." Hung Ju's expression didn't change. He said calmly, "Previously, your Huan country's Yin-Yang sword array and 5-element sword array had already killed hundreds of thousands of my Dao sect cultivators. The 200,000 to 300,000 sword cultivators that your sword cultivators besieged my cultivators probably don't have any spare energy to fight anymore, right? Previously, my Dao sect's 10-direction annihilation Great Array also killed tens of thousands of sword cultivator disciples. It can be considered a draw. It's reasonable for you and I to return separately. Now your sword array. No matter how powerful it is, can it be more powerful than the previous 2 sword arrays? Do you have any extra disciples that you can use?" "Ha ha ha. Hang Ju, do you think that sword cultivators only have disciples that they can use?" Qing Feng laughed. "Even if I don't have any disciples, this old man can still kill all of you." "Qing Feng, what sword array is this?" Hung Ju hesitated slightly before asking. "This old man will naturally tell you the name of this sword array." Qing Feng gritted his teeth. "But not now. Is this really a sword array?" Hung Ju felt incredulous. He released his divine telekinesis and looked up and down, but he didn't see any signs of sword light. Unexpectedly, Qing Feng didn't answer his question. Instead, he looked up to the north and said with melancholy, "Time is long and the past is long gone. This old man never thought that I would be able to talk so much nonsense with you. Moreover, this nonsense actually makes this old man feel very comfortable. In this life, only when you're about to lose it do you realize that normal is the best." "What?" Hung Ju was shocked and quickly retreated. Clearly, he understood the meaning behind Qing Feng's words. Qing Feng had already made his decision. Buzz! A roar came from the top of Qing Feng's head. Hundreds of feet above, a yellow-skinned swordsman appeared. The swordsman's body was extremely muscular, and there was a faint light surging around him. The surrounding heaven and earth spirit qi quickly gathered toward the swordsman. "This old man is Fan Ming Yuan of the 7 Spirit Mountain. I've been waiting for you all here. Come, come, come. I'll let you all have a taste of the power of my devouring sword array." As Fan Ming Yuan spoke, His body rapidly expanded. In a flash of light, a pagoda about 2 to 3 feet tall gradually appeared. This pagoda had 7 floors, and each floor was filled with strange runes. The runes flashed with various colors, and a faint fluctuation slowly spread in all directions. In an instant, it had spread more than 100 feet and continued to spread in all directions. Devouring sword array. The entire sword pouch exploded, and hundreds or even thousands of fist-sized pitch-black flying objects flew out from within. These flying objects were in the shape of a flat gourd. The front half was a head, and the back half was a body. The head was the same size as the body, and there were 2 2-inch-long wings on the body. When the flying objects rushed out of the sword pouch, the surrounding blood immediately rushed over and covered all of the flying objects. Wang! The blood landed on the flying objects and immediately seeped into them. The bodies of the hundreds of flying objects flashed with a pitch-black brilliance, as if they had eaten ferocious spiritual herbs. As the pitch-black brilliance flashed, the belly of the flying objects gradually became bigger, and the head gradually became smaller. In the end, the head was only the size of 2 fingertips. Li Jijia's flying sword had only been withdrawn for more than 5 feet. At this time, seeing the flying objects mutate, he formed a sword seal in his hand and stabbed towards the flying objects. The sword light was like lightning, and in an instant, it pierced the stomach of the flying objects. It looked like it was going to pierce through the flying objects. Unexpectedly, just as Li Jijia had absolute confidence, the flying object suddenly turned around. On its head, the eyes that had shrunk to the size of a mung bean flashed with a blood-red brilliance. It bit down on the flying sword. Ah! Li Jijia was dumbfounded. Crunch, crunch. The brilliance on the flying sword was actually swallowed by the flying objects. Chapter 2681. Buzz. While Li Jijia was still in shock, the remaining hundreds of flying creatures spread their wings and flew toward the dozens of golden core practitioners with bloodshot eyes. Spirit. Spirit swallowing bug. Suddenly, Qi Ming, who was scolded by Dasun, screamed hysterically as if he had lost his parents. What? These are spirit-swallowing bugs? Hang Zhao and the others were shocked. Spirit-swallowing bugs were strange insects from antiquity times and ranked second in the insect scripture. They were the nemesis of Taoism practitioners. How could these golden core practitioners not have heard of them? However, they had only heard of them, and almost none of them had seen them before. Impossible! Xianxia Song shouted. Spirit-swallowing bugs are half the size of a fist, and their fangs are very long, and their wings are faintly golden. These are the larvae of spirit-swallowing bugs. I've seen them in a damaged insect scripture when I was young. It's definitely true. Qi Ming's face was pale and he could no longer maintain his composure. He said desperately, "Quick, let's run for our lives. Even if they are larvae, they are definitely not something we golden core practitioners can resist. To deal with spirit-swallowing bugs, we can only use heavenly thunder and other things that do not belong to the 5 elements. This is the sword tomb, where thunder does not exist. Even if there are masters from the thunder-controlling sect, it will be useless. Even all our spells will be swallowed by the spirit-swallowing bugs. And if we use spells without restraint, we will feed the spirit-swallowing bugs with spiritual qi and attract more spirit-swallowing bugs. Unless a nascent soul master is here and feeds the spirit-swallowing bugs with spiritual qi." Qi Ming had already escaped far away, but his words could still be heard. Ah! Li Jijia could not help but scream. His flying sword was the closest to the spirit-swallowing bugs, and there were already 3 of them on it. In just a few words, the spirit-swallowing bugs had already swallowed most of the sword light of the flying sword. The strangest thing was that the body of the flying sword did not change much, but there was no spiritual qi in it. It was no different from an ordinary piece of iron. This is LV Ruochong's killing move to kill us. Heng Zhao could not help but feel cold. He really did not expect LV Ruochong to be able to find hundreds of spirit-swallowing bugs. Even a golden core cultivator would not be able to escape from a dozen spirit-swallowing bugs. Let's go! Without hesitation, Heng Zhao hurriedly flew toward the gap between the spirit-swallowing bugs. Since Heng Heng had already fled, how could Dasun and the others still remain in the air? Seeing the empty space, they prepared to flee. However, something happened that made Heng Zhao and the others' souls fly out of their bodies. The clumsy-looking spirit-swallowing bug flew very fast, like a dark light, and rushed to their front. He was not inferior to golden core cultivators like them. The strangest thing was that these hundreds of spirit-swallowing bugs did not fly to other Foundation Establishment stage disciples at all. Instead, they stared at all the gold core stage cultivators. Even if a dozen spirit-swallowing bugs flew to other places and prepared to attack the Foundation Establishment disciples, they only flew a few feet away and then quickly flew back. High up in the sky, the pagoda that the cultivators had overlooked was emitting a faint fluctuation. Spirit-swallowing bugs feed on the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. We are golden core cultivators, and our dantian contains the golden core, which is where the spiritual chi of heaven and earth is most concentrated. Isn't that the most delicious food in the eyes of the spirit-swallowing bugs? Qi Ming could not help but show off his knowledge, but he did not dare to stop at all. The golden core cultivators fled in panic. Although the Foundation Establishment stage disciples did not have to worry for the time being, how could they remain calm? Although most of them still maintained their formation, as a whole, they seemed to be in a state of complete defeat as they flew towards the west in a sorry state. But at this moment, 3 black lines suddenly streaked across the sky and landed right next to Qi Ming, blocking him in the middle. How is this possible? Qi Ming almost rubbed his eyes. These are just the larvae of the spirit-swallowing bugs. How do they know how to surround us? But how could the spirit-swallowing bugs answer his question? Before Qi Ming could fly again, the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs flew at the same time, and the black lines flashed and landed on Qi Ming's body. Oh no! Qi Ming was actually not slow, but he was actually surrounded by 3 spirit-swallowing bugs. He was really unlucky. Attack! Although Qi Ming did not dare to use powerful spells, at this moment, he did not hesitate to wave his hand and cast a Dharma incantation on the spirit-swallowing bugs. This golden core cultivator's confinement spell was very powerful. The spiritual chi within a foot of the spirit-swallowing bugs was slightly stagnant. Crack! The spirit-swallowing bugs opened their mouths slightly, and the fangs at the corners of their mouths that were not very sharp bit on the confinement spell. Immediately, the confinement spell was broken. Although Qi Ming was already mentally prepared, when he saw that the confinement spell was broken so easily by a flying bug, his expression changed instantly. However, before he could think further, the 2 spirit-swallowing bugs on his left and right had already begun to devour his protective light. Attack! Qi Ming continuously cast Dharma incantations, wanting to block the spirit-swallowing bugs. Unfortunately, before he could cast a Dharma incantation, his Dharma incantation was quickly devoured by the spirit-swallowing bugs and could only delay them a little. It's good that you can delay them. Qi Ming was slightly relieved. He hurriedly checked, wanting to escape from the siege of the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs again. Just as Qi Ming was checking, another black line flew quickly and quietly from behind him. Before he could react, it landed on his protective light. Creak! Creak! The spirit-swallowing bugs unceremoniously began to devour Qi Ming's protective golden light, which immediately began to flicker. Damn it! Qi Ming turned pale with fright. He clapped his hands, and a palm-sized scarf flew out from his storage bag. The scarf emitted a pink light, and after absorbing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, it rapidly expanded and covered the spirit-swallowing bugs behind Qi Ming. Creak! A soft sound, which seemed to be made by the spirit-swallowing bugs, was immediately covered by the pink light. Thank goodness! Qi Ming had just heaved a sigh of relief when 4 more black lines flew quickly from elsewhere. Obviously, they were attracted by the pink light. Damn it! How could I forget? Qi Ming almost wanted to slap himself. The spirit-swallowing bugs like the light from the Dharma treasure. I clearly knew that, and I even reminded others. How could I be so foolish? Why did I release the Dharma treasure? One of the spirit-swallowing bugs landed on the Dharma treasure and devoured the light. The other 3 spirit-swallowing bugs rushed toward Qi Ming. Facing 6 spirit-swallowing bugs at once, Qi Ming was very flustered. He cast spells one after another. What made him feel cold was that the spirit-swallowing bug speed of devouring spells was getting faster and faster. His confinement spell was almost instantly devoured by the spirit-swallowing bugs. I can't care anymore. Qi Ming saw that his scarf was about to be torn apart by two spirit-swallowing bugs. He gritted his teeth and rubbed his hands together. The Dharma power in his body surged, and a violent wave of Dharma power was generated from his hands. Kill! Qi Ming shouted and released his hands. With a roar, a bright light overflowed and covered the surrounding dozens of feet. A strong Dharma power rushed toward the 6 spirit-swallowing bugs. Chirp chirp, the 6 spirit-swallowing bugs cried out loudly as they were sent flying by Qi Ming's attack. They tumbled in the air. However, when the 6 spirit-swallowing bugs stopped in mid-air, they cried out and rushed toward Qi Ming again. It was as if the spell just now had no effect on them. Moreover, because of the light from Qi Ming's spell, another 3 spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted to him. This! Qi Ming almost cried. Then, he realized something. It must be Green Peak. What secret skill did he use? Let's go! Qi Ming hurriedly moved his body, wanting to escape. He had only flown 2 feet when the 9 spirit-swallowing bugs surrounded him. Even the 2 spirit-swallowing bugs that had devoured the scarf stuck their heads out of the scarf that had lost its light. They flapped their wings and flew toward Qi Ming. Qi Ming was anxious. He knew better than anyone how powerful the spirit-swallowing bugs were. However, he was the first to encounter so many spirit-swallowing bugs. He took out all kinds of yellow talismans and magic weapons from his storage bag and threw them at the spirit-swallowing bugs one by one, hoping for a miracle. However, none of these magic weapons that could control the spiritual qi of heaven and earth gave Qi Ming any hope. Ah! Qi Ming screamed. Just as the light around him flashed again and sent the 9 spirit-swallowing bugs flying, 2 of them actually got close to his protective light. They bit through Qi Ming's protective light and crashed into his body. Qi Ming's screams attracted the attention of many Golden Core practitioners who were fighting the spirit-swallowing bugs. They also attracted the attention of many Foundation establishment practitioners. The 9 spirit-swallowing bugs that had been sent flying by Qi Ming flapped their wings again and rushed toward Qi Ming. One of them was even attracted by the light from his spell and flew toward him. These 10 spirit-swallowing bugs all rushed toward Qi Ming's lower abdomen. His body was like a piece of paper and was easily penetrated by them. Ah! Qi Ming writhed madly in the air. He was in so much pain. Explode! Unable to bear the pain, Qi Ming made a spell and wanted to explode himself. However, when he made the spell, no Dharma power was produced in his meridians. The spirit-swallowing bugs had already rushed into his dantian and swallowed his golden core. Ah! At this moment, Qi Ming's Dharma power could no longer support the flying spell. His body fell from the sky and landed on the ground of the sword catacomb, a bloody mess. Buzz! From his flesh, the spirit-swallowing bugs that were smaller than before flew out again. They were much faster and flew toward the other Golden Core practitioners. The Foundation establishment and Golden Core practitioners who had witnessed this scene all turned pale. A practitioner in the early stage of the Golden Core realm, who was already famous on the Dawnrain continent, was killed by a dozen little bugs. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, how could they have believed it? Wah! At this moment, the sword hums that seemed to have subsided earlier once again rang out loudly. Amidst the sword lights of the cultivators several kilometers away, many swordsmen wearing pitch-black sword robes appeared. These swordsmen's heads and faces were all covered. Chapter 2682. These swordsmen stood on the sword lights and flew high into the sky. Their eyes looked at the 160,000 cultivators who were fleeing in panic. They took out a flat object from their bosom and put it in their mouths. Then, they took out a pitch-black bag from their waist and opened it. A bunch of pitch-black flying objects also rushed out from the bag. The flying objects were the size of a fist and were in the shape of a gourd. They looked exactly like the spirit-swallowing bugs. These swordsmen puffed up their cheeks and seemed to be blowing sounds that couldn't be heard by human ears. Along with the sounds, the spirit-swallowing bugs flew in the air, covering the sky and the earth, and rushed toward the cultivators in a dense and overwhelming manner. Ah! So many spirit-swallowing bugs? Seeing so many spirit-swallowing bugs flying towards them, the cultivators of the True Path sect were scared out of their wits. They could not care less about their formation. They all covered their heads and ran away, afraid that the spirit-swallowing bugs would target them. Buzz buzz buzz, within a few miles, The sound of the spirit-swallowing bugs spreading their wings could be heard. The entire battlefield was covered. Hold on, hold on! Li Zongbao flew in the air and shouted with all his might. However, the cultivators were already frightened by the spirit-swallowing bugs. How could they hold on? Senior brother Li, watch out! Xiao Mao shouted. A spirit-swallowing bug flew to Li Zongbao's back and rushed towards him. Humph! Although Li Zongbao was shocked, he still waved the immortal piercing whip in his hand and hit the spirit-swallowing bug. Senior brother, don't use your magic treasure. Fairy Xianxia was also shocked and shouted hurriedly. However, to their surprise, Li Zongbao's whip hit the spirit-swallowing bug and sent it flying back dozens of feet. It fell from the air and was dead. This doesn't seem to be a spirit-swallowing bug. Xiao Mao was also slightly shocked and hurriedly flew over. When he caught the spirit-swallowing bug with his hand, he saw that this spirit-swallowing bug was very similar to the previous one. However, there was a deep dent on its thumb-sized head. It must have been caused by Li Zongbao's immortal piercing whip. This spirit-swallowing bug. Fairy Xianxia quickly flew over and took a closer look. She could not tell. Fairy Xianxia had never seen an earth-devouring bug before. Naturally, she did not know that the earth-devouring bug was no different from the spirit-devouring bug. Humph, of course they are not spirit-swallowing bugs. Li Zongbao's voice came from behind them. If the sky is filled with spirit-swallowing bugs, why would the swordsmen of the Huan Kingdom use so many sword formations? Just this spirit-devouring array alone killed hundreds of thousands of people from my Dao sect. Indeed, Fairy Xianxia and Xiao Mao raised their heads and looked over. Although most of the spirit-devouring bugs flew towards the true Dao sect disciples, some of them left the group and pounced towards the ground. There was some vegetation on the ground, as well as some gravel. Creaking sounds could be heard as the gravel and vegetation gradually disappeared. Many spirit-swallowing bugs even pounced on some of the fallen celestial devices and magic treasures. However, these spirit-swallowing bugs were different from before. They swallowed the celestial devices bit by bit, and all the celestial devices and magic treasures were damaged. This is not a spirit-swallowing bug, but it is similar to the spirit-swallowing bug. Fairy Xianxia understood immediately. It must be that the swordsmen of the Huan Kingdom tried to cultivate the spirit-swallowing bugs but failed. Instead, they mutated. Those that devour gravel are probably earth-swallowing bugs, those that devour vegetation are wood-swallowing bugs, and those that devour celestial devices must be gold-swallowing bugs. That's right. There are also water-swallowing bugs and fire-swallowing bugs. Now they are all here to join in the fun. Let's kill them all. Xiao Mao also shouted. He stretched out his hand and took out the magic treasures that he did not dare to use. However, at this moment, another scream came from afar. Another early golden elixir realm cultivator had his body broken through by the spirit-swallowing bugs and rushed into his body. This swordsman is really cunning, Fairy Xianxia said angrily. They used hundreds of real spirit-swallowing bugs to kill them, and tens of thousands of fake spirit-swallowing bugs as a smokescreen. Between the real and fake, who knows which is real and which is fake? Who cares if they are real or fake? Let's kill them first. Li Zongbao sneered. He waved his immortal piercing whip and chased after the spirit-swallowing bugs, killing them one by one. However, Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao, and Fairy Xianxia were too weak. They only killed less than 30 fake spirit-swallowing bugs in 10 minutes. The other cultivators were fleeing in panic. Who would notice their actions? Li Zongbao was very familiar with this scream. He hurriedly looked up and saw that Li Jijia of the Changbai sect was covered in blood. Finally, he could not resist the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs and they rushed into his body. His corpse fell from the sky. Alas, Li Zongbao was silent. He knew that Li Jijia's flying sword was targeted by the spirit-swallowing bugs first. It was already good that he could hold on for so long. Unfortunately, he was a middle golden elixir realm cultivator of the Changbai sect and could not escape from being killed by the spirit-swallowing bugs. Before he died, he did not even have time to use the talisman given by his sect. Li Jijia is dead. Are the other middle golden elixir realm masters far away? Li Zongbao looked around, looking for his master. In the distance, Hung Feng was also entangled by about 10 spirit-swallowing bugs. Hung Feng was afraid of attracting more spirit-swallowing bugs, so he did not dare to use magic. He only dared to move in the air. When he could not dodge, he dared to use his magic power. It seemed that they were of one mind. When Li Zongbao looked up, Hung Feng also turned his head. When he saw Li Zongbao's gaze, he immediately waved his hand and pointed to the west. The meaning was very clear. He wanted Li Zongbao to escape. But how could Li Zongbao leave? He moved his body and was about to fly over with the immortal piercing whip. Hung Feng was furious. He was careless and a spirit-swallowing bug almost rushed into his protective brilliance. Senior brother Li. Fairy Xianxia said anxiously, even if you go over, I'm afraid you are no match for him. You will attract the spirit-swallowing bugs for no reason. If Li Zongbao wanted to say, if Xiaohua is there, what will you do? However, just as he said those two words, he heard a loud sword hum coming from the eastern horizon. A huge sword like a phoenix appeared in the air. Lu, Ruo, Chang. Li Zongbao said word by word. She. What killing move does she have now? Fairy Xia's expression changed. At this moment, 3 spirit-swallowing bugs flew towards the 3 of them. In the distance, in the direction that the Dao sect disciples had scattered and wanted to charge towards, which was 2 miles away, the faint smoke and dust was extremely dense. It was as if the smoke and dust that had covered dozens of miles had originated from this place. When Lu Ruochang's huge sword appeared in the air, a blurry figure appeared from the smoke. It was the first person that Lu Ruochang encountered when she entered the 4-square sword formation, Night Rain, who was wearing a black sword formation. Night Rain was the same as before. His entire body was hidden in his sword armor. Only a pair of eyes could see outside. The rest of his body was not exposed. No one knew what he looked like. Lu Ruochang's phoenix sword essence was reflected in his eyes. It was a kind of eagerness. Night Rain stretched out his hand and took out a strange object. This object was like a statue. It was the size of a palm and was dark green. It looked very similar to the palace guarding bug. It had a triangular head, a small body, and a thumb-length tail. However, this object had 5 legs, which was different from the palace guarding bug's 4 legs. On its head, there was only 1 eye, which took up more than 60% of its head. Yi Yu took out the object and began to chant in a low voice. The strange syllables were emitted in an extremely rhythmic manner. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the object actually reacted. Its entire body emitted a faintly discernible green light. This green light had an extremely strong penetrative power. It even clearly illuminated the dense fog around Yi Yu. Seeing that the object was glowing, Night Rain stretched out her thumb and placed it in her mouth. She bit it lightly and blood oozed out from the pad of her thumb. Night Rain raised her thumb and looked at the blood that was slowly flowing out. Her chanting changed again. The sound seemed to have landed on the blood. The blood that oozed out did not coagulate. Instead, it slowly flowed on Night Rain's thumb. Gradually, a blood-red green seal script appeared on the pad of his thumb. This green seal character was so exquisite and so strange. The thick fog around him actually surged with the appearance of the green seal character like boiling water. A small character could actually have such power. If others were here, they would definitely be shocked. However, Night Rain seemed to be used to this. His eyes were abnormally calm, without any ripples. Poof! Seeing that the green seal character was formed and was about to fly out of his hand, Night Rain did not hesitate to open his mouth and spit a mouthful of essence blood on it. Night Rain's essence blood was originally a cluster, and the green seal character was extremely small. However, when the essence blood rushed out, the green seal character flashed a faint green light. All the essence blood landed on it. Even a faint shadow fell with the essence blood. As the green light flashed, it was pulled out of Night Rain's mouth. Moo! It sounded like the moo of a cow. Just as the shadow fell into the green seal text, the green seal text suddenly made a sound. Night Rain's hand trembled slightly. It was as if the character suddenly became much heavier. Go! Night Rain did not dare to delay. His eyes were filled with anxiety. He flipped his hand and pressed his thumb on the object in the shape of the palace guardian bug with great difficulty. The green seal character formed by the blood landed on the object's eye. Whoosh! As the green seal character landed on the object's eye, the palace guardian bug's eye suddenly opened. A cruel, bloody and merciless green light swept out and rushed into the fog. Night Rain's face was extremely pale. His body was also trembling. As the palace guardian bug opened its eye, a green light appeared on its body. The palace guardian bug slowly floated in the air. Chapter 2683. Phew! Night Rain let out a long breath again. Then she waved her hand, and several faint green lights shot out, hitting the air about 100 feet away. The thick fog was slowly lifted as the green lights hit it, as if a layer of gauze was being removed. Under the thin veil, there were 4 groups of sword cultivator disciples. These 4 groups of sword cultivator disciples were all dressed in different sword attire. They were scattered near Yi Yu, and each group had over 10,000 people. They surrounded Yi Yu. Fellow swordsman Knight. After the thick fog was lifted, a first-grade illusory swordsman standing in front of each group saw Night Rain. He hurriedly flew up and bowed, saying, "It's time for us to contribute to the sword realm, isn't it?" "That's right." Night Rain nodded slightly, but her voice was weak. She said lightly, "Fellow Taoists from the Sword School of Sword Mountain, the Pingli Sword School, the Flowing Wind Sword Village and the Flying Thunder Sword Sect, you've been lying in ambush here for nearly 5 years, so you're very familiar with the cooperation of this sword formation. Now Jianghu has sent a signal, and hundreds of thousands of practitioners from the Taoist sect have fallen into the spirit-devouring formation. Needless to say, the gold core practitioners in the formation have been attacked by the spirit-devouring bugs, so they have no time to take care of the foundation establishment and chi-refining disciples. Those disciples have been confused by Jianghu's deceptive tactic and have been utterly defeated. Now is the time for us to contribute to the sword realm." The leaders of the 4-sword school were 2 men and 2 women. Hearing Night Rain's words, they were excited. Ji Ping, a gray-haired swordsman, bowed and said, "The Sword School of Sword Mountain is a small sect in the sword realm. Under the leadership of fellow swordsman Night Rain, we're able to come out for the sword realm and make such a great contribution. On behalf of more than 10,000 disciples of the Sword School of Sword Mountain, I'd like to thank fellow swordsman Night Rain. If fellow swordsman Night Rain needs any help in the future, we'll do anything for you." "That's right." Li Moji of the Pingli Sword School, a middle-aged swordswoman, also smiled and said, "According to Jianghu, it's because of fellow swordsman Night Rain that we have the opportunity to contribute to the sword realm. We're all very grateful to fellow swordsman Night Rain." "Haha, it's fine. We are all disciples of the sword domain. If we can do something for the sword domain, so what if we die?" Yi Yu said with a faint smile. Flowing Wind Swordmaner's Fan Ping became even more charming. She smiled and said, "It's a pity that we've been training with sword friend Night Rain for 5 years, but we've never seen his true face. It's really a pity. There will be opportunities in the future. Our 4 sects only need to remember Night Rain's sword friend's kindness." Flying Thunder Sword Sect's Huang Xing was a tall old man. His voice was also extremely loud. "Hee, my grace. You will naturally know in the future." Yi Yu's voice grew louder and louder. He waved his hand and said, "Now my 4 friends, get ready. Tell your disciples to follow the previous formation and prepare to activate the sword origin." The 4 of them shouted in unison. They were all abnormally excited. Yes, they were able to participate in the ambush of the 4-direction sword formation with the help of the sword formation. They did not need to fight the Taoist cultivators head-on. This was simply a naked military merit. Needless to say, the Yin-Yang sword formation and the 5-element sword formation, the disciples of the Kuan sword sect and the Taiha sword sect practiced the Yin-Yang flying sword. They were the best choice to set up the Yin-Yang sword formation. The 3-sword sect and the Cauldron sword sect could also gather the 5 elements flying sword. However, in the sword domain, how could these 2 sects be the only ones who could gather the 5 elements flying sword? The reason why the 2 sword sects were included in the 4-direction sword formation was that they had a good relationship with the Black Phoenix sword sect. As for the Duanshui Villa in the spirit-devouring formation, they were LV Ruochang's own subordinates. Everyone knew that the last formation was to deal with the cultivators who had escaped from the spirit-devouring formation. Many swordsmen did not believe that those gold core cultivators could escape from the siege of thousands of spirit-devouring bugs. The last formation would definitely kill the most enemies among the 4 sword formations, which meant that it would have the greatest military merit. The masters of the four sects had never thought that such a good job would fall on them. After all, they were already the second-rate sword sects in the sword domain, even though they had once been glorious. However, because of the arrangement of this mysterious Yi Yu, the four sword sects were selected. The masters of the four sects were overjoyed and immediately sent out tens of thousands of elites to cooperate with Yi Yu's arrangement. They trained for 5 years. For such a reason, how could Ji Ping and the others not be grateful to Yi Yu? These words were really from the bottom of their hearts. When they heard Night Rain's orders, the four of them shouted loudly and flew into the air above their respective sword faction disciples. With a wave of their hands, sword beams shot into the sky. The nearly 40,000 disciples emitted a faint sword beam as their figures gradually moved. It seemed to be an extremely mysterious trajectory. The 40,000 disciples guarded the surroundings of Night Rain, and each disciple moved within a certain range. 10 disciples formed a group, and formed a trajectory. 100 disciples, 1,000 disciples, and even 10,000 disciples from each sect formed a trajectory. The 40,000 disciples moved around Yi Yu at the same time. As the entire formation rotated, a strange suction force appeared above each disciple's head. Yi Yu's eyes flashed with intense passion. He pointed at the palace guardian insect that stopped in the air. The palace guardian insect's body shone brightly, and it strangely moved in the air like a real palace guardian insect. Seeing the palace guardian insect crawl to the top of Yi Yu's head, Yi Yu suddenly raised his head and opened his mouth. A faint green light shot into the air like a sharp sword and rushed into the palace guardian insect's body. "Chief!" the palace guardian insect cried out in alarm. Its one eye shot out tens of thousands of green light beams into the sky like a fountain. Then, it scattered back down. The place where the green light landed was where the suction force came from. It was the top of each disciple's head. "Kill!" Yi Yu roared. The sword light around the 40,000 disciples flashed. The sword origin in their bodies was ready to come out. However, just as the sword origin was about to leave him, the green light beams immediately penetrated the disciples' heads. Every disciple's body was immediately covered by a layer of green light. The sword origin was immediately imprisoned in the disciples' bodies. Pang, pang, pang. A series of light explosions rang out continuously, lasting for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Every light explosion was a disciple's sword origin surging and his body exploding. After every light explosion, the green light entered his flesh and merged with his sword origin. "Sword friend Yi, what is going on?" Ji Ping and the others were shocked and hurriedly shouted. "Ha ha ha!" Yi Yu raised his head and laughed happily. He said, "Didn't you all want to contribute to Sword Realm? Weren't you all not afraid of being crushed? Now is the time for you all to sacrifice your lives for Sword Realm." But, Ji Ping was at a loss for words. He didn't know how to ask. "You? Who are you? Why do you have to choose our 4 sword sects?" Li Moji and Fan Ping, the 2 swordsmen, were the most meticulous. They almost shouted in unison. At this moment, Ji Ping and the others suddenly understood that the 4th sword formation of the 4-sword formation was definitely not an ordinary sword formation. It was definitely an extremely sinister sword formation. Looking at the stance of their disciples, it was most likely a sinister sword formation that would exchange their lives for theirs. It was Yi Yu, a mysterious person that they had never seen before, who sent the 40,000 disciples of the 4 sects into this pit of fire. However, why would this mysterious Yi Yu treat the disciples of the 4 sects like this? Could it be that the 4 sects also had a grudge against him? In the blink of an eye, Ji Ping and the others had racked their brains countless times. It was as if they had racked their brains but still couldn't find a swordsman who had such a deep grudge against their sword sect. "Ha ha ha, didn't you all say that you wanted to see my true appearance?" Yi Yu laughed loudly. He stretched out his hand and pulled down his sword armor. He said, "I will now fulfill your last wish." Under the sword armor was an extremely handsome man. His eyebrows were sword-like and his nose was like a hanging gallbladder. He didn't seem to have any special features. Ji Ping and the others looked at him again and again. They couldn't remember anything at all. They couldn't help but smile bitterly at each other. "What? Can't you see who I am?" Yi Yu's eyes were filled with eagerness. His tone was much more cheerful than before. Ji Ping and the others smiled bitterly and then sneered, "I don't care what grudges you have with our 4 sections. However, you used the excuse of setting up the sword formation to avenge your personal grudge. You are the one that we hate the most in the Battle of Sword Domain. Today, we will fight to the death with you. We don't believe that the 4 illusory swordsmen can't escape from your hands. When we have a chance to live, we will find Lu Ruochang and Lu Jianyu and ask her to uphold justice for us. Ha ha ha. Seeing that the 4 illusory swordsmen were overflowing with sword light, the flying swords in their bodies were about to fly out. Yi Yu gently pointed his hand. 4 green rays of light fell from the top of the 4 people's heads. The green threads that were connected to their heads trembled rapidly. The 4 people's bodies were completely imprisoned by the green light, unable to move at all. Lu Jianyu? Are you still fantasizing about finding Lu Ruochang? How can this Yi let you all return alive? Yi Yu said cheerfully. Besides, even if you survive, even if people suspect that more than 40,000 people from your 4 sects died, will Lu Ruochang blame me? What? Ji Ping and the others struggled with all their might. However, their sword origin was completely imprisoned by the green light. They couldn't move at all. They couldn't help but despair in their hearts. When they heard Yi Yu's words, they were immediately shocked. The feeling of being toyed with filled their hearts uncontrollably. You have colluded with Lu Ruochang? Fan Ping couldn't help but cry out. What do you mean by colluding? Yi Yu sneered. This is the promise that Lu Jianyu gave me. It is also the price for me to kill hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators. Using 40,000 disciples of your 4-sword sect to exchange for the lives of hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators. Don't you think it's an extremely good deal? Chapter 2684. Shut up. Huang Xing said angrily. Since you think it's worth it, why don't you let your sword's gate come here to die? Yi Yu's face twitched slightly, but there was a trace of reluctance in his eyes. He said faintly, yes, you all said that you could give up your lives for the sword domain, but now that it's come to this, you all go back on your words. We'd rather do that, but we don't want to die in your hands for no reason. Huang Xing shouted. However, Yi Yu ignored him and only muttered, as long as you're a human, regardless of whether you're a cultivator or a swordsman, you all have the desire to live. However, some people don't want this chance to live and choose death for the sake of others. But what about the others? They're not grateful to these people, and after making use of them, they wantonly killed their descendants. The heavenly Tao is fair. You? What are you talking about? Li Moji saw Yi Yu's crazy look and was very scared. He said anxiously, 40,000 of our Swords Gate disciples have already fallen. Do you still want to live? Yi Yu looked up at the 4 of them and sneered. Not just you, the foundations of your Swords Gate in the sword domain. After the battle here, I'll kill you all. This is something that LV Ruochang has already agreed to. Only by completely wiping out all 4 of your clans will I be able to reveal my true face in broad daylight. You, who are you? Why do you have such a deep hatred for our Swords Gate? Ji Ping's face twitched. Before death, the desire to know the answer was incomparably huge. Didn't you just say it? You want my Swords Gate to come here to die. Yi Yu said faintly, my Swords Gate has already done it 8,000 years ago. 8,000 years. Ji Ping was stunned, as if he couldn't remember anything. You're a remnant of the Flying Dragon Sword Gate? Huang Xing suddenly remembered something and exclaimed. Ha ha ha. Not bad. There's actually someone who knows about my Flying Dragon Sword Gate. Yi Yu waved his hand, and an orange-yellow sword light soared into the sky. With a roar, a dragon-shaped sword intent flashed out from the sword light, and an enormous and indescribable aura spread out from the dragon-shaped sword, enveloping an area of several hundred feet. Flying Dragon Sword Sect. It really is the Flying Dragon Sword Sect. Ji Ping muttered in a daze. That's right. Since you know that I, Yi, am a disciple of the Flying Dragon Sword Sect, you should know why I, Yi, am here, right? Yi Yu said coldly, 8,000 years ago, your 4 sects took advantage of the fact that my Flying Dragon Sword Sect's vitality was greatly damaged to invade my dragon platform and exterminate my descendants. Tell me, should I not take revenge today? Sword friend Yi. Huang Xing said helplessly, that was 8,000 years ago. What does it have to do with us? It's better to squash enmity than to keep it alive. You've killed tens of thousands of disciples from our 4 sects, So, you should have avenged your flying dragon sword sect, right? The four of us don't plan on going back alive. The other disciples of our four sects are even more innocent. Thousands of years ago, the disciples of my flying dragon sword sect who were stationed at the dragon platform were not innocent? When your four sects annihilated my flying dragon sword sect that day, did you ever consider that you were innocent? Yi Yu said coldly. Now you're just complaining. How can you be innocent? Furthermore, the Sword Region Dragon platform belongs to my flying dragon sword sect. You've occupied it for thousands of years. Shouldn't you leave? Shouldn't you pay the price? Yi Yu lifted his eyes to look towards the east as he spoke. The sounds of fighting were already faintly discernible. He snorted from his nose and said, This Yi is too lazy to say anything more to all of you. This Yi is only telling all of you this because all of you have been so respectful towards this Yi over the past 5 years. All of you should hurry over. The credit of killing hundreds of thousands of Dao sect disciples is waiting for this Yi to share with everyone. Following that, Yi Yu raised his hand and the four of them were surrounded by a green light. The four of them didn't even have time to make a sound before they turned into bloodstains. These 4 bloodstains were the same as the other 40,000 bloodstains. Although they no longer had any vitality, they were still spinning like before. Rise! Yi Yu roared. He opened his mouth and a faint green light was shot at the palace guarding bug. The palace guarding bug moved slightly, and the tens of thousands of green threads trembled at the same time. Phantoms emerged from the bloodstains. They were the vengeful spirits of the 40,000 swordsmen from the 4 sects. Once these vengeful spirits were drawn out, a vicious aura immediately rushed out. This vicious aura gathered together and even dispersed the thick fog. Ha ha ha! Yi Yu laughed. He pointed his hand and the tens of thousands of green threads flew out and landed on the tens of thousands of bloodstains. The bloodstains boiled and countless bubbles emerged from the bloodstains. Streaks of bloody light followed the green threads and rushed into the palace guarding bug. The bloodstains quickly shrank. Soon, all of the bloodstains disappeared. The palace guarding bug became half the size of a person, and its body emitted a red and dark green light. Squeak! The palace guarding bug raised its head and made a sound. The sound was not right, but the invisible wave spread far away. As the wave swept across, the vengeful spirits slowly rushed out from the ground of the sword tomb one after another. Go! Yi Yu flew up and landed on the palace guarding insect's body. The palace guarding insect carried Yi Yu and quickly crawled through the air. Tens of thousands of vengeful spirits surged toward the east like a tide, which was where the Dao sect cultivators were charging from. Within a radius of several miles around Yi Yu, even more vengeful spirits surged forth like a thin tide and gathered toward the battlefield. On the battlefield, 3 spirit-swallowing bugs quietly turned into 3 black lines and rushed to the left of Li Zongbao and the others. Li Zongbao and the others had already noticed it. Humph! Li Zongbao sneered. He waved his hand and the immortal piercing whip hit the spirit-swallowing bugs again. But something unexpected happened. This time, the spirit-swallowing bugs were not knocked away like before. Instead, they opened their mouths and bit the light of the immortal piercing whip and started to chew it. Ah! Spirit-swallowing bugs. Li Zongbao was shocked. He hurriedly activated his Dharma power and the light of the immortal piercing whip shone brightly. He wanted to knock the spirit-swallowing bugs away. But as soon as he moved, the 2 spirit-swallowing bugs that were flying toward Xiao Mao and Fairy Xianxia were immediately attracted by the light of the immortal piercing whip and rushed toward Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao hurriedly activated his flying skill to escape, but he was not as fast as the spirit-swallowing bugs. In a moment, 2 spirit-swallowing bugs caught up with him and bit the light of the immortal piercing whip. What should I do now? Li Zongbao had always treated the immortal piercing whip as his treasure. When he saw the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs devouring the light of the whip, he knew that in a moment, his whip would be turned into ordinary iron like Li Jijia's flying sword. He was extremely anxious. At this time, Fairy Xianxia and Xiao Mao also flew over. Although they did not dare to get too close, they were not too far away. But they were helpless when they saw the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs. Should we use the congenital primordial water? Fairy Xianxia hesitated and gritted her teeth. However, the congenital primordial water was activated by the Ice Phoenix celestial body. Although the celestial body did not need to be released, the fluctuation of the celestial body, was it spiritual energy? Fairy Xianxia could not be sure. Moreover, the celestial body was more than 100 feet long. It was far more attractive to the spirit-swallowing bugs than ordinary cultivators. Fairy Xianxia was afraid that she would become the target of the spirit-swallowing bugs the moment she released the Ice Phoenix celestial body. The consequences would be worse than Li Zongbao losing the immortal piercing whip. Attack! Li Zongbao helplessly used his Dharma incantation, such as the fireball skill and the confinement skill, one after another. Unfortunately, none of them were effective. The light of the immortal piercing whip gradually disappeared in the mouths of the spirit-swallowing bugs. Forget it! Li Zongbao shook his hand and was about to throw away the immortal piercing whip. But at this time, the spirit-swallowing bugs flew up again and headed for Li Zongbao's arm. Obviously, they had followed the trajectory of Li Zongbao's Dharma power. Oh no! Li Zongbao also saw Qi Ming and Li Jijie being killed. How could he not know the power of the spirit-swallowing bugs? He hurriedly flew up. Just as before, Li Zongbao had only flown a few feet when the spirit-swallowing bugs were already behind him. Li Zongbao trembled with fear and could only activate the Dharma power in his body, regardless of whether it would attract more spirit-swallowing bugs. At this critical moment, there was a loud buzzing sound. In the sky, about 1,000 feet behind Hang Heng, a faint light flashed. Dozens of strong hurricanes appeared and a huge palm gradually formed. It was unknown which middle-stage gold core cultivator could not resist the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs and could not help but use the talisman given by his sect. The hand of the nascent soul had already been activated. The powerful confinement skill firmly held the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs surrounding the cultivator. However, many of the spirit-swallowing bugs around the cultivator were attracted by the spiritual power of the talisman. They abandoned their targets and flew toward the hand of the nascent soul. The 3 spirit-swallowing bugs on Li Zongbao's back were also attracted by the talisman. They turned their heads and flew toward the hand of the nascent soul, ignoring Li Zongbao. I was lucky. Li Zongbao's back was sweating. He could not help but whisper. He lowered his head and looked at the immortal piercing whip in his hand, which had lost its brilliance. He regretfully and reluctantly put it into his storage bag. Oh no, it's Uncle Liang Mingfu from the Nanming sect. Fairy Xia's eyes were sharp. She had already seen the gold core cultivator using the hand of the nascent soul. She could not help but cry out. Sure enough, Liang Mingfu made an incantation. The hand of the nascent soul clenched fiercely. When the hand opened, the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs that were caught fell from the sky. However, after falling for a few feet, 2 or 3 of them flapped their wings and flew up again. The other 10 spirit-swallowing bugs fell with the wind and did not fly up again. Seeing this, Liang Mingfu's face lit up. However, his joy only flashed for a moment before it froze on his face. Within 100 feet, dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted by the spiritual qi of the nascent soul's talisman. They flew toward the hand. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.